suppose Neuro wants me to comment on this video.
Alvin Plantinga.
I have no idea what this is
Alvin,
about.
Alvin Plantinga, the
Most
Western
people,
philosopher.
yeah, probably will be out of their depth when talking about this. So it just is.
Now, bottom of 239, Alvin Plantinga, you see his dates there, 1932 to the present, still alive, but retired a few years ago from his professorship at Notre Dame. He taught at Calvin College for quite a number of years and then went on to Notre Dame, but he's a son of the Christian Reformed Church. He went to Calvin College, studied philosophy with Harry Jellema there. Jellema was also the teacher of Cornelius Van Til. Now, Van Til was a much older man, but Van Til studied with Jellema at the beginning of Jellema's career, and Plantinga studied with him toward the end of that. Plantinga is a very distinguished philosopher. Distinguished, respected not only in Christian circles, but in non-Christian circles as well. Now, when I studied philosophy at Princeton from 1957 to 1961, it was almost unheard of to find an evangelical or Reformed Christian in the discipline of philosophy. When it would be just amazing if you had a philosophy seminar at Princeton and somebody were to suggest that the God of the Bible provided an answer to some philosophical problem. You would probably get laughed out of that classroom, but it was just so unusual that it would almost never happen. Now, there's been a great change since 1961 down to the present. Beginning about 1970, there was quite a remarkable influx of Christians into the discipline of philosophy. People like Plantinga, Walter Storff, Paul Helm is another one.
So I mean, it's interesting because the entire like philosophical tradition of the West and it being tied to Christianity, a bunch of the notable like sort of founders of the church, they seem to have commented right on different philosophers, right? Like Plato, comparing Plato to Moses and so on and so forth. So they had different understandings. So I think in the beginning, since the Catholic and the Orthodox Church have a strong philosophical tradition where they lay out, things, and you could look at St. Augustine and all the philosophy stuff, right? So it seemed like Christianity is obviously one of the most philosophical religions, right? So I don't see the problem they're having. The problem must be because they became Protestants and then they learned the Bible from the Jews, and so they have a weird view of history now, thinking that you can't use philosophy as justifications for the Bible because the Bible has to function on its own terms, right? So through this idea of sola scriptura. So since you know Plantinga is part of the Calvinist group, right? How did he come to the conclusion that you have to reintroduce philosophy, right? It's kind of odd.
Robert Adams, Marilyn Adams, quite a lot of Harold Westphal, just a large number of Christians entered into the discipline of philosophy. Dallas Willard, I keep thinking of names here. And it's really there's a very strong movement of Christian philosophy in the country. Christians, there's a Christian philosophical journal called Faith and Philosophy. There's a Christian Philosophical Society called the Journal of, I keep thinking Journal and Faith and Philosophy and various combinations. I'm sure that'll come to me eventually. But there's a Christian Philosophical Journal. There are many Christians who are well known, who are even prominent in philosophical circles. And when I say prominent, I mean respected, again, not only by Christians, but also by non-Christians. A lot of this development has been due to Alvin Plantinga. He has become very prominent. He's known as one of the 2 or 3 most important philosophers of religion in the world, certainly very important in the sphere of epistemology. And so we have a lot to thank Plantinga for. This is a great time. If you're a Christian and you're interested in philosophy, this is a great time for you to go and do graduate work and get your doctor's degree and enter into the philosophical world. 50 years ago, you would have been cut off without comment. But nowadays, the philosophers are respecting traditional Christian people as never before, and you'd probably get a more favorable reception in philosophical departments around the world than you would get from the usual religious studies department or the usual theology department in a liberal seminary or liberal university. So Plantinga, a very, very important, very impressive figure, certainly. He's very much concerned about epistemology, and he's developed a kind of epistemology which brings God into it, and he calls it Reformed epistemology. It is significant that he believes he's following some of the leads of John Calvin in claiming and developing this system of Reformed epistemology. So let's follow him and see what he has in mind. Page 240, Plantinga distinguishes between warrant and justification. Now you remember I distinguished earlier between externalism and internalism.
Hold on, let me play this verse.
This is big. This is
say Calvin was born in 1509. So Luther was about 25 years old by now. Luther was a monk. In fact, he had just become a professor at the University of Wittenberg at the time that Calvin was born. I'm going to give you his life in several chapters, as I tend to do. And so we'll think first of all of his career as a student. He was born July 10th in Picardy. He's a Frenchman. So we probably should call his name something like Jean Calvin, but I don't do French very well, and so I'm going to go conventional here, as most folks do, John Calvin. But he certainly was French throughout his being, his DNA, and throughout his career. He was a great tribute, a great sort of source of pride, I would say, to France, even though at the time they didn't really appreciate it that much. He was a brilliant student. His father was a lawyer and was part of that rising middle class we've talked about in prior weeks. His father was very successful and fairly well-to-do, so you might say he was kind of upper middle class. His mother was a devout Roman Catholic, and so he grew up in a fairly serious and rather academically oriented family with a deep devotional spirit to it. And Calvin viewed himself as a faithful son of the church and had no idea whatsoever that he would be discussed hundreds of years later for departing from the Roman Catholic faith, which he eventually did. He was originally going to be studying for the priesthood. That was what usually happened with very bright and precocious students. They would become priests or go into some sort of religious order, and that was the original plan. But Calvin's father had a bit of a falling out with the church, not that he left the Catholic Church, but it was more of a political kind of difference that came along. And so his father told Calvin when he was in his mid-teenage years and in the middle of his studies that he should divert his attention academically to the study of law. And so when Calvin was just in his mid-teenage years, having progressed pretty rapidly, he entered the University of Orleans, which is connected to the University of Paris, one of those free universities that had come following the Crusades, one of the most prestigious, and Orleans was almost like one of the departments of that university, but there he studied law, beginning in 1525. He, however, was so taken with the new learning that was really coming out through the Renaissance and the rediscovery of classical sources and classical languages and so on, as many people were, that he really deemed himself more appropriate for a kind of scholarly career in which he would represent part of this new kind of wave of academic interest that was going back to the original sources. We've talked about that in connection to the Renaissance. So he was really kind of a Renaissance scholar in his own self-image at this time, and he was continuing his studies past law school to head in that direction. His conversion to the Reformed faith took place sometime between 1529, not before that, and not later than 1533. And it's hard to pin down precisely what the circumstances were. He's not as self-disclosing as Luther. And so we have to do a little more triangulating as we go along to get some of the pieces to fit together. But we know it was sometime in this time frame that it took place, and we have a few little pieces of the puzzle here that at least are useful. He was continuing his studies at the time at Montaigu, which was also connected to the University of Paris. And at the time, in 1529, he voiced his contempt for a movement in France that was pejoratively referred to as the Gospelers. And these were people who were touched by the Lutheran Reformation and were so filled with the gospel that was kind of the insulting name that was applied to them, the Gospelers, you know. If you know the history of this time, you know eventually these people were called the Huguenots. But at this time, this is kind of the early reference to them. And Calvin had nothing but disdain for these Gospelers. And he thought the entire Lutheran movement was a heretical movement and that it was working to damage the church. And he had nothing but support for those who were trying to stamp out this Lutheran heresy and the Gospelers there in France. So we know that was his attitude in 1529. Things got a little bit dicier for him about that time based on a friendship that he had with a friend of his who was also a cousin of his named Peter Robert, or probably pronounced Pierre Robert, but we'll go with Peter Robert. And the two of them were close friends. Peter Robert was himself also very academically oriented, brilliant, and the two of them formed a fast friendship. But as John Calvin and Peter Robert would interact, it became a kind of subtle suspicion somewhere down inside of Calvin's soul that Peter Robert himself was tilting toward these Gospelers. You know, he never said it, but Calvin began to detect in some of the ways that he would describe his view of them and his view of things in general. And it put Calvin in a bit of a conflict of conscience, because the more he became convinced of this, the more he became convinced that his duty as a Roman Catholic would be to turn in his cousin, report him to the authorities. And he knew that if the Inquisition were launched against his friend, he would likely be found guilty and would likely pay for his faith by being burned at the stake, which was quite a common form of execution at the time in France for people who were associated with this Gospeler movement. So Calvin, who loved his friend and cousin, had this conflict of conscience that was being aggravated. The more he talked to Peter Robert, the more he was feeling this anxiety over this point. Calvin's principal kind of life ethic was obedience. That's what he wanted for himself. That's what he believed all Christian people should embrace. And so this put him in this rather ticklish position. It was in the midst of this kind of crisis of conflict of conscience that he had a very interesting experience one day. He'd been studying, as he often did, late into the night at the university, and he was making his way home well after dark. The street lights were lit and so on, and he was walking along down a fairly dark street toward his apartment, which was about 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden, quite unexpectedly, this old man came out of the alley and grabbed Calvin by the nape of the neck. Now, Calvin was kind of a wimp, you know. He was fairly slight, didn't have an ounce of fat on him, so, you know, and not very athletic. So, and this old guy just grabs him and yanks him up, gets right in his face, and says to him something like this: "Young man, have you heard of God's free gift?" You know, Calvin's terrified. What to do with this fellow? He had immediately knew this had to be one of those gospelers, and he didn't want to be seen with him. He didn't want to be associated with him. He just wanted to get away, and he kind of wriggled and squirmed and finally was able to distance himself. "Come on, man." Calvin went home shaken up, got back to his apartment, closed the door, and thought, wow, what was that? And kind of forgot about it then. So about a week later, Calvin is going home, this time in the middle of the day. And as he's going down the street, he looks down about a block away and he sees a crowd gathering. And you know how it is when you see a crowd gathering, you're sort of drawn to it, what's going on. And so Calvin himself, curious, begins to kind of meander in that direction, just finding out what was going on. And he realizes soon enough, one of those sights that was not all that uncommon in those days, somebody was about to be executed for heresy by being burned at the stake. And as he got a little closer, he realized the man who was about to be burned was none other than that old man who had accosted him just a week earlier. And Calvin stood at a distance and watched and was impressed with the equanimity of this old man. No pleading for his life, no tears, no kind of pathetic expressions or begging for mercy. He just stood there with a kind of calm repose. And as the fire was lit, the man began to sing a song. It was a song that had been written about 1 year earlier. You may have heard of it. It's called "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God." And this old man still had a strong voice, and without apology, he began to sing, "A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing." And the flames came up around him and finally silenced his voice. And Calvin was deeply, deeply moved by that entire incident. We don't have any...
So that could have been a Luther in him, right? Many people may not know this, but Luther actually composed musical hymns, right? And those became part of the worship services at the Lutheran churches, right? So this is a sort of something that is noticeable. If you go to some of the Protestant churches, there are singing songs and hymns, right, in praise of Jesus, and they consider the singing part of their worship. Right? It's actually very strange, right? Because if you walk into a mosque or if you walk into like a Buddhist temple, right, you won't hear that much singing for sure, right? There's not people singing and dancing and partying and, you know, praising the Lord or praising Allah or praising Buddha and stuff. It's not really something that happens. Right? There's a sort of a silence and a sort of reverence, right? So it's just kind of interesting to see that, right?
Any reason to think that was the moment of his conversion? It probably wasn't, but it certainly did exacerbate the conscience that was already conflicted within him, as he was appreciative of Peter Robert and yet concerned about the implications it had for his own Roman Catholic understanding. And now to see this man evidencing such grace in his life in the face of this horrific death, all of it stirred up a great deal of emotion in Calvin at that point. And the other thing that took place about this time, he was working on his first publication. This is certainly before he was converted. It was called De Clementia. It was a commentary on Seneca, the Stoic philosopher of the first century. It was a commentary on Seneca's treatment of the subject of judicial clemency. Seneca had argued that he thought this ferocious form of public executions that took place in Rome, crucifixions, that sort of thing, was actually counterproductive. And Seneca was arguing that there should be some place for judicial clemency and mercy, and that might actually have a more positive effect generally in the Roman world. And Calvin was always taken with that, even before his conversion. Calvin was a strong opponent of this form of execution, burning at the stake. Many people who seize on something that appears to be a black eye in the career of Calvin, if you've ever heard anything about him from his critics, you will have heard of the execution of Peter Servetus in Geneva that took place years later. And I've heard this statement made by people who should know better, and they'll say, well, John Calvin burned Michael Servetus at the stake. Well, that's not true. In fact, if anything, Calvin argued against burning the man at the stake. He was trying to argue for clemency. That was always his.
So, I mean, so you got a mixed bag of things, right? You have, the whole Michael Servetus thing, right? Obviously, he condemned the dude, but, I guess he didn't support the death penalty. So this is an interesting thing, right? Using Seneca, a Stoic philosopher from the Roman times, right, to argue against the death penalty against other Christians. Right, so that seemed like it's pretty liberal idea, right? So it's like John Calvin was sort of on the, sort of cusp of like this idea of religious toleration, but also using classical arguments against the sort of status quo or the majority opinion, right? And sort of wanting to preserve both religious toleration and, maximize freedom, right? So people don't face the death penalty, right? So, I mean, this is a pretty interesting idea, right? So one could maybe place him on the side of liberalism and progress in terms of that, right?
Interest. We'll talk about that later. But just to kind of plant the seed here, he was wondering about this Catholic approach to enforcing orthodoxy, and all of this was stirring in his soul at this time. And so it was a rather complicated time for him. And again, I say we don't know exactly when his conversion took place, but it was sometime along this, in this time frame. We know that his conversion took place at least by 1533, and we know that the conflicted state of his conscience was constantly on his mind. And so these are a couple of short snippets from descriptions he himself gave of what he was going through at this time. The first one reads, being exceedingly alarmed at the misery into which I had fallen, and much more at that which threatened me in view of eternal death, I, duty bound, made it my first business to betake myself to your way, condemning my past life, not without groans and tears. And now, O Lord, what remains to a wretch like me? But instead of defense, earnestly to supplicate you not to judge that fearful abandonment of your word according to its deserts, from which in your wondrous goodness you have at last delivered me. Calvin was sensing at this point, in a sense, the uselessness of all that he had done up to this time. He thought his labor, his focus, his obedience were a basis upon which he could claim some kind of merit. And now the more he thought about it, the more he realized the paucity and the bankruptcy of all of that. And yet he felt at the same time that he hadn't really achieved that sense of a forgiven conscience. Even here, you still sense a little bit of that. But at some point along the way, he describes the following, quote, God by a sudden conversion subdued and brought my mind to a teachable frame, which was more hardened in such matters than might have been expected from one at my early period of life. Having thus received some taste and knowledge of true godliness, I was immediately inflamed with so intense a desire to make progress therein, that although I did not altogether leave off other studies, yet I pursued them with less ardor. So somewhere along the line, he caved. And he describes it as a rather sudden thing. Although he certainly was struggling for some time and something like St. Augustine. In fact, this writing almost sounds like the Confessions, in which he describes the wrestling match he was going through, but at some point, it seems the lights came on for him and he surrendered to this Reformation faith, justification by faith alone, as it had been spelled out to him now by these people that he was acquainted with. So we know it took place at some point along the line. Precise timing is not clear, but we do know it was by 1533 because of what happened at this moment.
This whole idea of justification by faith alone is a pretty interesting concept, right? It kind of underscores this notion of works, right? See, this is part of the reason that Martin Luther wanted the Epistle of James to be taken out of the Bible, right? Because it says faith without works is dead, right? And basically the argument is that you don't need anything but a free gift of the Holy Spirit, right, in order to be saved, right? So all that Christ needs is your confession of faith, right? Not some sort of, being some sort of community hero, right? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's weird he uses the term progress as well. It's very interesting.
Right, it seems rather benign, but the entire goal of the thing, where he's sort of saying like, look, like one of his first, arguments against capital punishment, right? And you'll see like historically Christians have supported capital punishment, right? So it's just kind of interesting that he used Seneca of all people, right, a non-Christian source, to argue against capital punishment, right? It's just interesting.
Well, that's kind of what I mean. Is like, I guess this is at the mid stage of the Renaissance or something, where did the Jews resurrect the Roman stuff to psyop the Christians to think that they need to become like Rome or something?
Well, that's what's so funny, is that he's saying that all the Renaissance stuff is just happening now, and already Calvin is one of the, and also Luther, they're one of the foremost proponents of it.
Well, I was trying to argue this the other day, and actually I'm glad we brought this up, because I may be wrong, but I was trying to argue to this Catholic Quaker guy, and I was basically trying to say to him, like, well, Martin Luther was influenced by the Rosicrucians and ultimately the Kabbalah, right? Do you think that there's a good argument for that, or do you think that that's like too big of a point?
Yeah, me and Unseen got a bunch of good information on that.
So if you just had to give me like a very brief talking point of like, because obviously we know that like,
well, I would say his collaboration with Reuchlin, right? Johann Reuchlin, because he wrote a work called De Arte Kabbalistica, and basically Luther openly corresponded with him on matters of religion, right? So he's friends with Kabbalists, right? But that's not the only thing, right? He also said salvation by faith alone, which is this thing that they're talking about, justification by faith. He called that the Christian Kabbalah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Well, here's the other question. What would you say so I know I asked you this the other day, but I just want to make sure I read it. If you had to trace back the earliest things that influenced people like Luther or Reuchlin and Calvin via the Kabbalah, how far do you think you could trace it back to, like 800, 900, 1000 AD?
I mean, I guess my view on it is a little skewed, right? But I mean, certainly there's a lot of figures that Protestants think are important from the period before the Protestant Reformation, right? Like, so there's people like Jan Hus and the Hussites,
Yeah,
right?
I haven't heard
There's
that name in a long time, but that's a good. I'm glad you brought that person up. We looked them up because
yeah, there's people like Thomas
weird.
Aquinas, right? Because Aquinas sort of brings in these ideas of the state, right? Like I talk, you know what? It's interesting, because I was talking to the NFTU guys yesterday, right? And they were saying that Aquinas is basically like pushing statism, right? And this was actually Father Bonifaci, right, that was making this claim, right? Boniface, right?
Yeah, he's really hardcore because I would say that like there's an argument for that from my limited understanding. I think there's an argument for that.
Yeah, so like it's things like that. I would say the influence of Aristotelianism in the 1100s, right? The influence of Manichaeanism in the 6th century. Right, I would consider all these things like interesting.
Well, that's kind of what I was trying to say to the Catholic guy. I was like, look, I'm not here to bash Catholics, but I was like, look, obviously by the time of the Protestant Reformation, the Orthodox and the Catholics had already gone their different ways, right? And so, like, obviously, some people were thinking other people are heretics, right? So, like, this didn't come out of nowhere. And so I was trying to argue to him, like, I think that these schisms go back a lot further back than just Luther, right? And he kind of agreed, but he didn't know what it was. He's like, well, but the Orthodox, and we just had like doctrinal issues. We didn't really like think each other were heretics. But I think that there's a good argument, like you said, that like the Manichaeanism, especially, came into the fold. Now again, like, who was the main one? It wasn't Aquinas. It was Saint Augustine, right? Who was a Manichaean before, right?
Yeah, but he also wrote against it. His writings against Manichaeanism show the sort of widespread influence of it. Just how Aquinas wrote against Aristotelianism, right? So as they talk about the heresies in their own age, right, in the 2nd century, right, Saint Irenaeus talked about Gnosticism, right, in the 5th century, right. Augustine talked about Manichaeanism, right, in the 1100s, right. Aquinas talked about Aristotelianism, but I think all of the sort of dualistic effects of Manichaeanism, right, the ideas that this world is in a sort of a fallen state, it can never be healed, right? You could see that in the Protestant elements, or the idea,
so
that lean totally towards statism, right? In Calvin and Luther sort of seem to, come from Aquinas, right? So it's like sort of like
so. Let me ask you like this, and again, like we probably had this conversation 100 times, but like I'm trying to look at different ways to explain this to the lay people, right? So would you say it's like this, like Christianity, for like when Unseen is saying like, well, Christianity fought against all these things, like you said, Augustine wrote against the Manichaeans, Aquinas against this. At the same time, it's kind of like this, like once you write about something and critique it, you also leave your own writing up for critique, which what that means is that your enemy can read what you're writing and use it as like a roadmap of how to subvert your defenses or something, right? Now, having said that, would you say that like there's an argument to say that like, well, since these ideas didn't find their place among Christianity, at least in the official like Orthodox or maybe even Catholic Church, that these beliefs like went underground into like different mystery schools or Judaism itself, and then kind of like found their way back into Christianity by the time of the Protestant Reformation. That's kind of how I look at it. So that's kind of like how I would describe it, I guess, from my perspective. But
yeah, I would say that there's this idea, right? Like whenever I talk to Christians, right, that you know, like the law and works are sort of highlighted as being a sort of corrupted element, right? Or you know, within the faith community. So the distinction between the church and the state sort of has interesting development.
And would you say that that's kind of what Boniface was trying to say to you yesterday? Is like kind of getting at that situation where there's kind of a conflation between, because like, see, like I think I argued with somebody about statism not too long ago. I can't remember who it was, but I remember like they said, "Well, are you a statist?" And I was like, "Well, aren't you a statist?" And I can't remember exactly what it means, but like statist is one of these terms. Like, I guess does that mean that you just kind of like give up the power of the people to the state because it's just moved beyond a king and queen and representation of a people or something like that? Like, I guess like, does statism mean, from this definition, does that mean like basically like a bureaucracy, essentially, like a bureaucratic state, essentially?
It doesn't have to be.
Okay. So what does that mean? So what does that mean?
Certainly,
exactly,
Aquinas didn't think of it as some sort of bureaucratic state, right? He had no conception of such a thing, right? They lived in a time of monarchies, right?
So what do you think what do you think the point of that, of him saying that Aquinas was a statist or something? What do you think he's trying to say by that? Because I just want to make sure I understand the argument.
Well, I was asking them about this thing of Chiliasm, right? That Unseen is talking about, right? And a sort of heretical idea of trying to look for an earthly kingdom to solve all the problems, right, of Christianity, right? So I was asking him, what's this about? And he highlighted Aquinas, who I also highlighted many times. So I was very surprised he had done that, right? So then I went in on that question, you know, on Aquinas. I said, could you tell me more about why Aquinas, you know, specifically did all this? And he said, well, he was actually, you know, infected by the germ of Aristotelianism that he was fighting. So that's exactly what I said. Right on my show, I said, you know, in trying to incorporate Aristotle's philosophy or argue against it, he became Aristotelian, right?
So basically, it's like this, like it's basically like a weird, like, political pragmatism within Christianity or something like that. So it's like trying to drag in like pragmatic Aristotelian values into Christian doctrine or something.
Yeah, because the goal of morality in you know, Aristotle is politics. The goal of morality in Christianity should be either as an effect of the salvific spirit, right, that has attuned you to a higher nature, or it's because you understand that your duty as a Christian means to live a moral life.
Right. It's interesting. So it's kind of like, trying to think of the right word that's the most accurate. It seems like trying to think of the right word. I can't think of it, but it seems like there's a weird. I don't even know the right word. Political, because you're saying, okay, because you're saying political. So it's like prescribed. It's like a prescription based on political. So basically, I guess, okay. Here's what it is. You're saying that there's like a conflation between like political action and salvation. Is really kind of another way to put it, I guess. So. That's interesting that someone that far back like Aquinas would bring that up. I think that's pretty crazy. Proto-woke.
Well, so did Augustine, because he talks about the city of God, right?
Interesting.
Right. It's like Rome represents the other side of the coin, right? Rome is like debauchery and it's lawlessness,
Right,
but
so
the
like
city
an
of
inverted
God.
Rome. Inverted Rome. So like invert Rome into a good Rome, essentially. Or Zionism, maybe. You can kind of look at Zionism like that, though, where it's like Zionism's not purely about the Jews. It's about this kind of like heaven on earth ideology or something. I mean, not that it's not about the Jews, but I'm just saying like maybe that's the wider vision that is trying to incorporate.
Well, that's Christian Zionism, right?
Right. So you have like the Kabbalistic or Zohar version, and then you have like the secret society Christian version, I guess. Makes sense. And I'm looking up the Jan Hus guy because I haven't heard that name in so long, and that's weird. One of the people that they have here is John Wycliffe, and I remember reading about that dude because I remember Wycliffe John, And when I looked up this guy John Wycliffe before, I remember that he had a very strange history. So I'm just going to click on it for a second. Because, let's see, Wycliffe is traditionally believed to have advocated for or made a vernacular translation of the Vulgate Bible into Middle English. So he became an influential dissident within the Catholic priesthood during the 14th century, and his ideas are often considered an important predecessor. His political theological theory of dominion, so he's the father of dominionism, right? Meant that the church was not allowed to own property or have ecclesiastic courts, and men.
See, that's the thing. Like John Wycliffe and John Calvin, they did a lot about looking at like state versus church dynamics, right?
Right.
So that's another reason why I'm like sort of very interested in their ideas because they seem to be expanding on what Aquinas was doing.
Right, and it also seems interesting because this is someone that seems to have influenced Jade Dyer and people like that quite a lot too. Own property.
Yeah. I mean, the whole tag thing comes from the Calvinists, right? They're the ones that were using it before, right?
Right. Property.
And also, they are the Christian nationalists too. So, they're the most prominent group. Yeah, they're the most prominent group. I'm pretty sure Doug Wilson is a Calvinist, right? I could be wrong about that, but yeah.
I wonder if the Wilsons proper. I wonder if they grew up in Calvinism.
They did.
Yeah, I think somebody told us that they did. Yeah, but I can't remember if I ever saw the proof of that.
Yeah, look, this guy is a reformed. It says conservative, reformed. Yeah, so he's a reformed Christian. So it's a branch of Calvinism. So I was right.
Well, this is interesting. So his political theological theory dominion meant that the church was not allowed to own.
Oh, hell nah!
What is that? Is that a bug?
Yeah.
That was pretty crazy.
That was the tinier bug.
That literally scared me a little bit. Yeah.
The tinier bug.
Okay, and it said men in mortal sin were not entitled to exercise authority in the church or state, nor to own property. Wycliffe insisted on the radical poverty of all clergy. Yeah, that's extremely interesting, honestly. So he's like a very hardcore, like
You
communist.
commie.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I can see why. I'm not saying it's like all bad. Like I can understand where he's coming from, kind of. But Wycliffe has been characterized as the evening star of scholasticism, as the morning star of the English Reformation. Interesting. Jan Hus. So let me go back to Hus for a second here, because I remember when I took you know hardcore Western, just Western Civ history, like um, yeah, I remember looking really deep into these two guys because they seemed to be like a real huge pivot point. Because then he said that John Huss was a Bohemian Reformation, striving for reform of the Catholic Church, lasting for 200 years. Yeah, it's a Bohemian Reformation. That's kind of a weird. Most immediately in approval of the Reformed Bohemian religious denomination. He opposed many aspects of the Catholic Church in Bohemia, such as its views on ecclesiology, simony, the act of selling church offices and rolls, or bigger things. Yeah, see, this is kind of what I was trying to say to the Catholic guy too, of like how like there was already this corruption going on, like, and that's kind of why a lot of Protestantism was justified in a sense, because there were like this is one of the reasons why the French Revolution was so bloody, I think, too, because the Catholic Church had been so corrupt, but also like there was a struggle within it, and then whatever was going on between the Catholic Church and the bureaucracy of France was like putting a lot of pressure on a lot of different sectors and stuff like that, and it made, I think, the pressure boiled over, and people just started like getting extremely violent with their neighbors, essentially. And then the Jacobins basically like, encourage that and shit like that. So it's kind of a weird thing to talk about, but I think that's a big. This is kind of interesting because I haven't looked this far back on this particular area in a while. Alexander V issued a papal bull that excommunicated Huss. However, it was not enforced, and Huss continued to preach. Huss then spoke out against Alexander V's successor, anti-pope John the 23rd. For his selling of indulgences. Huss's excommunication was then enforced, and he spent the next 2 years living in exile. Then he was put in prison. He refused. He was burned at the stake. Interesting. The Hussites refused to elect another Catholic monarch and defeated 5 consecutive papal crusades. The Hussite Wars. See, this is, yeah, and there you go, the Moravian. So the Bohemian and the Moravian populations remained majority Hussite until 1620s, when a Protestant defeat in the Battle of the White Mountain, the lands of the Bohemian crown, coming under the Habsburg. Okay, sorry, this is very interesting, actually. It's pretty crazy. Prague. So this is like the history of the Czechs, basically.
Right. And I think like the Hussites are somehow related to the Templars, but I'm not sure how. But
right. But are they also connected to the what do you call them? The Moravian Brotherhood, perhaps?
Oh, the Moravian Brethren like came out like around that time, like a little later, right? So it's interesting I think Martin Luther also went to Bohemia, so it's just kind of interesting. That whole area is kind of like,
Right. That's it. That's what I'm trying
and
to
also that's where the Fourth Crusade like was launched, right? With Vlad Dracul and all that stuff, right? So I just
right.
think it's an interesting area, right?
Yeah, well, that's something I've talked to a few people about privately, like including Twilight, and tried to get into that because there's a lot of weird pivots that happened in and around that region in that time. And like for instance, like you know, if you look at the religion of that area, it was like Zoroaster or something like that. And so even going back to like the Roman days, there was very weird like overlap between like their deity and Jesus and stuff like that. Like he disappeared for 3 days and came back, and there's like some very strange overlap in the pre-Rome and like back when Rome was trying to do business with that region. So it's pretty something kind of weird going on with that region for sure. And heritage can be traced to 1457. Okay, so previously the Hussite movement. Okay, so the church's heritage. Okay, so yeah, 14. So yeah, was that a little bit after that, like 100 years later? You have the yeah, that's pretty weird. Because see, this is what's weird about it is like a lot of I've heard it rumored that a lot of the Anglos, quote unquote, of the Northeast of America are actually kind of like Moravian brethren related or something like that. So
Yeah, look at this right here, dude. This is crazy, man. Slow state watching this dude right here, right? This is Grid 1 show he's watching, and he's got John Zerka and Destiny on there.
Wait, whose panel is this?
Grid 1.
Grid 1 has John Zerka and who's the other person?
Destiny on his panel.
Really?
Yeah, man. So I'm telling you, like my show, like that I did last time on Grid 1, like people need to be checking that out because it's this dude's up to some weird. Like this dude had some weird connections, and he also just like was like, oh yeah, the Mossad are great guys. Like he just said that on a panel like, for no reason. So, yeah.
Right. Well, to be able to pull Destiny and John Zerka onto one panel, you got to know some people. I would say that.
Yeah, you got to know some weird people, like, and to get your like homies to like whatever podcast and to get them to modern day debate and all. I mean, it's just weird.
Yeah, John Zerka's got some crazy stuff that he's been involved in, dude. Like I've seen this dude do some like some very, very, very.
See, all these dudes are like going to World War debate to like talk to Sam Tripoli and suck all these celebrity nuts to try to get famous, and that's exactly what that guy, you know, Landry, and all these people are doing. You know, they're like hooking up with like Alex Stein and anybody they could use. Right? It's just really weird. Like, you know, you have to play the game, and they'll like reward you for supporting these, you know, online celebrities. It's actually really sad.
You scratch my back, I scratch your back.
Right.
You scratch my nuts, I scratch your nuts.
Right. That's why all these guys like, you know, like these guys act different. Like when like Jay Dyer or like Days of Noah and all this stuff comes around, like they act totally different because they're like, they know why they're really here. Right. So it's like, you know, so it's just very interesting. But yeah, back to the tape. You know.
Yeah, and if you guys need to call it, if you need to call it, then you know, I totally understand too. Like, don't feel pressure, but this is weird. This is just very interesting to me. It's like this is I wasn't sure what this video is about. I didn't know it's about Calvin, but this is yeah, I think that Hussite and the Moravians and the
he's got one on Huss too. He's got like an entire thing on Huss.
Interesting.
Yeah, so Bruce Gore goes into like some interesting stuff. Right now.
Yeah. Well, it's just weird because Pillager sent me the stuff. Sent me a bunch of videos like similar to this one where it's like I just kind of like, what the hell is all this stuff? And yeah, it's pretty weird because I haven't thought about this stuff God, like John Calvin, I honestly forgot he was French. I thought, for whatever reason, I kept thinking he was like Dutch or some shit. But yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, because it's weird. Like so many people told us look into Calvinism, right? And I know you put it in your book too, like writing about Calvinism. So, but yeah, if you want to continue doing this, we can. If not, it's cool. Anything. But
Wait, do what?
Huh?
Wait, what'd you say?
No, I was saying I know. I know we said that we were going to commit to 30 minutes. So I'm just saying if you don't want to continue, I just give you an out and just okay.
Yeah, no, it's cool. We could go on for now. Honestly,
All right, cool.
I'm cool with it.
All right, cool. All right, let's see where it goes.
Associate of his was a man named Nicholas Kopp. Nicholas Kopp was quite a highly esteemed scholar himself, a philosopher, and he had just been elected the rector of the University of Paris, which would be something like being its president. It would be a very prestigious post, and it was expected that people who were going to assume that kind of responsibility would give a major academic address to the faculty and to others who would come and be in attendance. And so Nicholas Kopp, on this occasion, got up to give this rather lengthy and erudite address on some point of academic interest to all of the assembled faculty and so on. And as he was speaking, the audience, and especially the more astute faculty members, became increasingly restive. And you began to hear a little bit of bustling and noise, and it increasingly, there was a little bit of a crescendo to it. It was increasing as he went along, because it gradually dawned on people that what Nicholas Kopp was actually doing was giving a very erudite and academically respectable defense of Lutheran Reformation theology, you see. And so the faculty, though this was not a Catholic school, it was a free university, nevertheless all of these people, of course, maintained their allegiance to the Catholic Church. And literally, Nicholas Kopp had to flee from the stage at the end. His inaugural address became his swan song. And he ran off the stage and actually escaped from Paris on horseback, you see, as a result of this speech that he gave. People did a little research and discovered that the ghostwriter of the speech that Nicholas Kopp had delivered was none other than our friend John Calvin. And so John Calvin at that point became a wanted man himself. And so this brings us to the third chapter of his life I'm calling Calvin the Fugitive. He was not able to get out of town as quickly as Nicholas Kopp. Kopp almost, I think, expected this. He had the getaway car kind of waiting with the engine.
So, by the way, the same thing happened to Martin Luther, apparently. Right? Martin Luther, right, had to flee, right? There's like a warrant out for his arrest, and he just like went, he fled. So.
Running outside the door, so he got out of town. Calvin hadn't thought ahead quite that well, so Nicholas Kopp wound up in Basel. Basel is a city, of course, as you know, in Switzerland. Switzerland at this point, constituted by multiple what are called cantons, like provinces, was going both ways. Each canton had its own independent autonomy and could decide whether to stay with the Reformation or go with stay with the Roman Catholic Church or go with the Reformation. And the city of Basel, kind of that city-state, had decided to go with the Reformation. And so Nicholas Kopp went to Basel, which was sort of a refuge then for him and others like him. But Calvin was not able to get out of town quite so quickly and actually was on the lam in France for about a year, or at least for several months, more or less having to hide and stay in the shadows and stay out of the public eye and so on. Finally, however, he was able to escape the following year in 1534 by dressing up as a peasant worker, a very good disguise, and he sort of shuffled out the gate along with some other people, and somehow the metal detector didn't pick him up, and he was able to get away. And so he went to Basel as well. And so John Calvin joined his friend Nicholas Kopp, and the two of them were there for a couple of years. And of course, this is kind of a time of being officially a fugitive. But then it brings us to 1536, when Calvin actually begins what you'd call his real ministry. I'm calling this Calvin the pastor. That may not be quite the right word, but he certainly does some pastoral ministry during this time. The most important thing that happened over this couple of years is that he produced a document called the Institutes of the Christian Religion. Now, if you're familiar with the Institutes, you know it's a pretty good-sized 2-volume work. And it may seem a little striking that a 27-year-old guy who's a fairly new convert could produce that. He did produce the skeleton of it. So when he's about 27 years old, this document is produced, but it was a very short version of it. It was more of a pamphlet, a kind of short apology for the Reformation tradition and for the Reformation theology. He addressed it to Francis I, who was the King of France, with a lengthy kind of preface dedicating the work to him and hoping that he would have a more benign attitude toward these folks who were part of the Reformation there. We don't know if the king ever saw it or took any note of it, but anyway, that was its stated purpose. But this Institutes of the Christian Religion spread like wildfire. Just like Luther's 95 Theses had earlier swept through Europe, it didn't take long for this shortened version of the Institutes to similarly sweep through Europe. It was translated into multiple languages and became kind of a staple.
By the way, here's another interesting talk here. It says Luther and Calvin on predestination. So yeah, so there's a huge tradition, because of this concept of justification by faith alone, right? They've abandoned the notion of free will and they moved into predestination, right? So this is another concept that sort of, obviously certain Orthodox Jews believe this too, right? So it's just a very interesting sort of concept, right? Not in free will, but in predestination. So a lot of Reformed theologians. Now, it's interesting to note that the whole entire tag thing, right? Transcendental argument for God is sort of based on
sorry, I wasn't trying to cut in, but I'm just sitting here and I'm reading Resident Evil Wiki about the official history on Los Illuminados, and it's eerily similar to all this, including the time range.
Right, yeah.
Founded in 1554.
Yeah,
and from they were Los Illuminados beliefs are syncentric, whatever, in nature, drawing heavily from Roman Catholicism. Whatever, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, they're trying to say these guys right here. Lord, let me show you. These guys here, I'll show you. Right, is these dudes? You see this?
Yeah.
The Alambardo. Right. And you can see here. It says here, see also the Illuminati in occult philosophy and secret societies. Right, and then if you go to that page, it just says Gnosticism. So
yeah,
yep. It doesn't make any sense. So yeah,
and it even says about here that they were it was a sect of Christians. So
yeah, these guys were like Jesuits. Like the guy who founded the Jesuit order was part of this Alambardos. So yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So I think
what's their big claim to fame? The Alambardo.
Says, well, they're called the Illuminati, right?
That's a mouthful.
And traced to a Gnostic origin. It says.
Oh, and it's in Spain too, huh? So it's like all coming out of Spain. Well,
and that's exactly where Los Illuminados comes from Resident Evil 4.
Claim to fame is being associated with, this guy, Ignatius Loyola, right? See right here, it says Ignatius of Loyola, while studying in Salamanca in 1527, was brought before the ecclesiastical council on charge of sympathy with the Alambardos.
That's starting to sound like what the Castellan gotten. Okay, so the old Castellan, they shunned the Los Illuminados people back then in the 1500s and sent them to an island to go and die off, and then the Castellan in these times feels bad for what he's got to pay for the sins of his ancestors, and then allows the Los and allows them to come back and take over the village with the pair. Oh my God, dude! It's just from what I'm reading, Valdelobos, Valdelobos. So that's what they call it, the parasite, and that's very close to what you just said here.
Now check this out. Molinism, named after 16th century Spanish Jesuit theologian Luis de Molina. Now check this out. It says right here, it says a later case happened between 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century, Tenerife, Canary Islands. This concerned Sister Maria Justa de Jesus, a Franciscan nun who was accused of practicing Molinist doctrines. Right now, if you look at what Molinism is, right, it says is a thesis that God has middle knowledge, or scientia media, the knowledge of counterfactuals, particularly counterfactuals regarding human action. It seeks to reconcile the apparent tension of divine providence and human free will. Now, check this out, who it mentions. Right? It says prominent contemporary Molinists include William Lane Craig, Alfred Fredoso, Alvin Plantinga. So there's our boy, Plantinga, who Neuro Jack is here very interested in, right? So, and of course, me and Pilliter did a series of presentations on Plantinga, right? So there it is, this whole idea of Molinism, right? Because he's a communist, he's super involved with this question about free will and predestination, as I've said, right? So,
Well, so what you're saying is that this is all a Jesuit psyop.
It's a something psyop. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily just one sect of a particular cult. It's all an amalgamation, but it's definitely a psyop, yeah. Especially if everything's supposed to turn into a New World Order type of mentality.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, what are they smuggling in? Like, what? Because, like, it's funny because, like, Pilliter was saying something to me like, you don't really need to justify your beliefs. Your beliefs are just, and I'm not saying he believes this. I'm saying, like, he was saying this in regards to what he had sent. Because I know he has like conflicting feelings about Plantinga and some of these other people, but I guess, like, what do you think they're trying to smuggle in with this Molinism or something? Like, what do you think's the stuff that the Los Illuminados are trying to smuggle in? Like, what's the Alambardos? What are they trying to? What do you think the key smuggling with the predestination and stuff like that is? Like,
I mean, I'll give you a hint. I'll read some of the stuff that Sadler says to Leon. Like, it's always very religious because they're pushing the whole, like, he's an occult member, a religious cult member. Sacrificial lamb, you will receive our most sacred body. It begins now. So I mean, like, from the very get-go, he's telling you you're going to receive a holy body. When day breaks, you too shall join my covenant to share in our holy blessings forever. He constantly refers Leon and Ashley to lost lambs. Deliver unto them salvation. Let's see. Now abandon your body. Like, obey. Like, it's constantly telling you to shed your body, become one.
Well, actually, it makes sense from this point of view, because they're saying, like, well, if you give up your free will because you've put a parasite in you, you've put the parasite of whatever this cult is, which is supposedly Christianity, but obviously, I don't think Jesus is like a parasite that comes and, like, animates your body.
Well, that's the funny thing is the Los Illuminados actually believe that the Los Plagas parasite was given by God, and the only way that you can actually be in them is to take the parasite. You can't be an actual member of the Los Illuminados unless you've already been initiated and the parasite accepts you. So, again, I don't want to put too much into video games and LARPs, but when you look at the symbolism behind it and how eerily it's echoing just what we've been talking about here. I mean, the people of this world shall become one through the holy body. All nations, religions, creeds, with one will and one God, we shall witness the coming of a paradise free of misfortune. Your hatred, your grief, your agony, I can relieve you of all these burdens. Like a babe in the womb, the subjects of my kingdom need only drift about in tranquility. I mean, there you go.
So it seems like it's very clear they're selling predestination in Resident Evil 4, essentially.
The sorrows of this world are without number. Study your heart and know this to be true. Incessant war. Oh, my shit's moving. How dare you move? Anyway, pursue them. The lost lambs are escaping. Deliver unto them salvation. It's just, the whole entire time he talks throughout the entire game, it's basically pushing this whole, like at the end of the game, why do you rob the masses of this great thing that I'm offering them? So I mean, doesn't sound too bad, right?
I mean, I think I'm ready to line up and get my parasite.
I was trying to find where it went, but it
See, this is what we should do, though. We should take these like ancient fucking things and then show how they're showing us in like Resident Evil. Like, did you know that Resident Evil, doing like a really annoying like Mr. Beast voice, like, did you know that in Resident Evil, of all things, they were talking about the Los Illuminados, but really what they're talking about is the Alambardos and the Jesuit order.
Well, welcome to psyoping. We can make it seem like it's one thing when it's really another. Oh, here it goes. The people of this world shall become one through the holy body. All nations, religions, creeds, with one will and with one God, we shall witness the coming of paradise free of misfortune. Your hatred, your grief, your agony, I can relieve you of these burdens. Like a babe in the womb, the subjects of my kingdom need only drift about in tranquility. My child, do you still not understand? Why would you rob so many poor souls of their salvation? Why do you oppose me? Have you no compassion? Child, do not disobey your father. Why do you drive further into sin? It is the will of God. O Las Plagas, this lamb yearns for enlightenment. Obey your Lord. Atone for your sins. Yes, yes, come, sing, praise, voices, sing praises until my cup overflows. Faithful disciples, assemble, besiege, do not let them escape. Ah, the voices, my flock, their song. It is time to shed the one. My flesh shall give birth to a God everlasting. And if you die by Sadler, he says, your salvation begins now. And, let's not throw out the implications of what they put in the beginning, where all the people in the village were very devout, I guess Roman Catholic, if that's what you want to call them, based on what the Wikipedia is telling me for the people. They were a bunch of God-fearing, real believers of their faith. And, the Los Illuminados, or whatever the true narrative is behind it, whether you want to say it's them experimenting on people, basically, by death, we rewrote their brains. And I can tell you, in some places, they take that shit very seriously with, like I said, the imagery of what Resident Evil 4 puts in your face. The occultism with the goatness and that stuff, and especially the religious symbolism behind them. I can tell you there's a few people who probably would not reject what the Los Illuminados gives you. They would have no problem accepting this whole, parasite thing. That's why I'm starting to realize that it's a lot more scary than when I realized that, like, when you heard Mr. Wilson say it, it's one thing, but I don't know. Go ahead. I'm just reading. Uh-oh. There is no escape. There is no place for you in our paradise, but you may yet return to us one who has been lost. Oh, I thought it was funny. In Separate Ways, if Sadler kills Ada at the end, he says, "Death is only the beginning." Who else also says that? You should know. We've seen the movie a billion times. Imhotep. They were even pushing that in The Mummy, but you know. Sorry, Brendan
Well,
Fraser.
It's the secret Egyptian mystery cult. Everybody's Egyptian.
But I mean, maybe that goes to say that, like, because maybe they have to some way get everyone to participate in some type of ritual. I mean, that's what it's starting to feel like. It doesn't matter whether I watch a movie, whether I listen to music, whether I go to a restaurant, eat a sub. It seems like in every single way of part of my life, I'm in a ritual, whether I notice it or not. So,
What's the matter, Goy? You don't like to do some rituals?
Yeah, buddy. Buckle up, Buttercup.
We're gonna send over the gay cowboy who did the song with Miley Cyrus's dad to give you a little lesson.
Yeah, well, you know what? When that song came out, I called it then and there. So, you know, he wasn't hiding nothing. Everything's a fucking stage at this point. Every time I look at a fucking flicker on the screen or hear a voice on the television, it's just like, oh, psyop, oh, LARP, oh, LARP, oh, psyop. You walk outside and you look at the billboard they just put downtown, and all you see is obey, consume, reproduce.
Well, how else are you gonna absolve yourself of all the sin that you've done?
By becoming one with the holy body. But, you know, unfortunately, apparently, the only parasites they want to put in me is in the atmosphere to make me sick and slowly die off, not, you know, join some magical cult where we're all one mind, one body, and, you know, I can live in tranquility.
They also want you to, you know, go be with a gay man and get a
oh, you know, sodomy. Well, judging by the Facebook comments I read earlier, everyone's all for Sodom and Gomorrah, so even the alleged straight people.
Are you a Gomorrahite?
I don't know. I'm tired of having to deal with other humans and their fucking endeavors. I know that. Like, nope, I didn't ask to be put on this earth with Los Illuminados, you know, and all these other crazy bastards. Just fishing in the dark, son. Anyway,
throughout Europe of people who were associated with the Reformation as it was gradually developing. The problem was nobody knew who wrote it because Calvin wrote it anonymously. He didn't have to. He was in a safe place, so it wasn't that he was doing it for self-protection, but he was so embarrassed at how ambitious he had been earlier, how much he wanted public esteem through his writings. He wanted to be recognized as a great scholar. And even though he was a retiring personality, there was plenty of ego going on there. And so his first writing, the De Clementia, he was constantly down to the publisher's office. How's it selling? You know, how's it doing? Has it made the New York Times bestseller list? You know, he was constantly worried about it. The second one, he didn't want any of that. So he wrote it, and it was this overnight sensation, and nobody knew who wrote it. But they figured it out eventually. But anyway, at the beginning, this was probably the most important thing he produced right in that time frame. Certainly was the most important. Things settled down in France at the same time, and he returned to France, but just about the time he showed up, there was an edict from the king called the Edict of Coucy. And I'm not going to go into the details, but the long and short of it was it changed once again the policies in France and put Calvin in something of an awkward position. So once again, he had to flee. So he was only in France there briefly. This time he went south, and he went to Ferrara, which is a little province in Italy, which happened to be under the rule of a woman by the name of Renee of Ferrara. It may be you've never heard of her, but she was one of the most important kind of quiet forces at this time. And I want to do a little vignette about her, not today, but when we come back. But just for now, I want you to know, Calvin showed up in her court. She was already tilting heavily toward the Reformation. She formed a fast, lifetime friendship with Calvin. He worked in her court for about 6 months as a court secretary and had a huge impact on her, really solidified her deep understanding of the Reformation faith. And she used quite a bit of political clout over the next several years to protect people, both in Italy and in France, who were adhering to the Reformation understanding of things. And so she became quite an interesting person in her own right. But Calvin is there briefly. When things had settled down a bit, he decided he was going to head for Strasbourg. Strasbourg is in Germany. It was probably one of the most important cities in Europe at that time as a kind of bastion of Reformation, refugees and so on. And he thought that would be a place where he could probably carry on his studies more efficiently. And so he decided to take off for Strasbourg, and he left Ferrara and went through Switzerland on his way to Strasbourg and stopped off for the night in Geneva. Motel 6, you know, he just checks in, not trying to be noticed or anything. He got there late at night, intended to leave the next morning and continue his journey to Strasbourg. Well, by this time, people knew that John Calvin had written the Institutes. They figured that out. And somebody spotted John Calvin coming into town, checking into the hotel, and passed word on to a guy by the name of William Farel. William Farel was the leader of the Reformation in Geneva. In Geneva at the time, there had been an official decision. This is in Switzerland, again, another canton, you know, had decided to go with the Reformation. William Farel was the leader of this, but it was an extraordinarily difficult and complicated situation in Geneva. Even though they had made the decision to go with the Reformation.
It's kind of interesting. The guy's named William Farel, and then the famous actor's named Will Ferrell, right? So it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of weird shit like that. That's why I was talking about Wyclef Jean too. Like you have like Wyclef Jean, John Wyclef, you know, pretty weird.
Yeah, it's like, do they all you know, pick their names after like Protestant reformers? Like, what the hell?
Well, Will Ferrell is definitely in some sort of crazy cult. I don't know if I showed you the videos of him, but like he's definitely like
some
deeply
shit that,
involved. Yeah.
Yeah, like Unseen has a lot of info where the Freemasons say like there would be no like Freemasonry without the Protestant Reformation. So he's got some quotes of them saying that.
Well, I'll tell you another thing is like when you see the name like Tyler is like a guard for the Freemasonic thing. So a lot of times when you see the name Tyler, it's like code that this person is like a gatekeeper for like a Masonic temple, or at least like metaphorically so, right? So like I think for example like Tyler Durden in Fight Club might be like code for like he's like there to like guard you know, the narrator from fully comprehending like what he's getting involved in or something. You know what I mean? Like he hasn't been fully initiated yet or something like that. So it's got
Tyler Perry.
Like Tyler Perry. Oh my god, yeah. Thankfully I've never seen a Tyler Perry movie, but I get the gist.
And those people who were arriving in Geneva, in many cases, had extraordinarily distorted understandings of what the Reformation really stood for. And the principal view that was out there that was creating the problems was a group called the Libertines.
Now, what's interesting is that, you know, he's going to talk about the Libertines, right? And how they're sort of You know, obviously they're huge in the French Revolution, right? But also, right, when Rousseau composed the discourses on inequality, right? He actually wrote them for the Republic of Geneva, Switzerland, right? And his dad was sort of a Calvinist preacher. So they were hugely influenced by Calvinism, right? You could tell that some of these ideas, were like, like firmly ingrained, right? It's like been going on for like 100 years. And then Rousseau's like born into this, sort of climate. And of course, Rousseau's ideas and also the ideas of the libertines, right? Both of those influenced the French Revolution, right? So,
view that was out there that was creating the problems was a group called the Libertines. And the Libertines, in the name of the Reformation, argued for some preposterous ideas. For example, they said, we are justified by faith alone, therefore it doesn't matter a bit how we live. In fact, we can prove that we're justified by faith alone by living licentious lives of debauchery and drunkenness and sexual immorality. And
well, that kind of sounds like Sabbateanism, right? It's like the Sabbatean Frankist sort of idea, right? It's sort of very similar to this, right? So it's like, like around the same time, you have like 2 or 3 different groups that sort of believe the same thing, right? They're sort of, religious accelerationists trying to bring on the end times and all this type of stuff, all right? And yeah, if we commit more sins, Jesus or the Messiah, right, will come back faster, right? So yeah, so some of them came up with this idea at this time. Right?
By so doing, we really take a strong stand for preach the gospel that is justification by faith alone. Now, Luther would never, ever, ever countenance anything like that, nor would Calvin, nor would any responsible representative of the Reformation understanding. That kind of accusation has often been made, but responsible representatives of the theology of justification by faith alone repudiate it out of hand. So please be clear of it. Paul himself was accused of that. Romans chapter 3, we see evidence of that, and he repudiated it. And so this movement represented not only a misunderstanding of the Reformation, but a slander of the Reformation, and there they were in large numbers in Geneva. So much so that they had virtually created a kind of red light district in Geneva in the name of the Reformation, you see. So this is what William Farel was dealing with. And he needed somebody with the intellectual clout to persuade the leaders of the city and kind of the general population of the city how abhorrent this was, and hopefully to lead the city in a more responsible and balanced pursuit of what the Reformation should really stand for. And here came John Calvin, this young genius who had produced the Institutes. And so William Farel couldn't resist the temptation. He goes over to the Motel 6. Calvin was already in bed. Bangs on the door. Calvin, he's, whoa, what is this? He didn't know what was going on. He opens the door, and there's William Farel, who announces his presence and says that he'd like to come in and visit with John for a moment. So John Calvin invites him in, and they sit down, and William Farel began pleading, beseeching, begging John Calvin to stay in Geneva. Don't go to Strasbourg. Stay here and join in the work that I'm doing to make the city of Geneva a city where the Reformation can truly flourish in the proper expression of what it really represents. Calvin had 3 words for Farel. In your dreams. Said, he did not want to be an upfront guy. This was not his calling. He said, I am a scholar. I want to do scholarly work. I will write, and I'm going to find a nice little cubicle with my books and my papers, and I'm going to write, and I'll do what I can for the Reformation for sure, but I am not a kind of guy that's going to be up there in the limelight, and that's just not my interest. Farel didn't like that answer. and he kept upping the pressure. And finally, when Calvin made it clear in no uncertain terms that he did not intend to stay, he was going to leave the next morning, Farel gave what Calvin later called Farel's dreadful imprecation. And he describes it in these words. I need my glasses here, so you'll... Then Farel, this is Calvin describing this incident, who was working with incredible zeal to promote the gospel, bent all his efforts to keep me in the city. And when he realized that I was determined to study in privacy in some obscure place, and saw that he gained nothing by entreaty, he descended to cursing, and said that God would surely curse my peace if I held back from giving help at a time of such great need. Terrified by his words, and conscious of my own timidity and cowardice, I gave up my journey and attempted to apply whatever gift I had in defense of my faith. So Calvin was no match for the fire of William Farel, and he remained there in the city. Probably the first incident that took place, which really showed the genius of Calvin, took place only a couple of months later. And this is called the Lausanne Disputation. Lausanne was another of these city-states in Switzerland that was having to decide which way we're going to go. Go with the Roman Catholic tradition or adopt the new Reformation view. And so each of these city-states there in Switzerland was having a similar kind of discussion. But Lausanne was a major city, and so the direction it went was viewed as being highly important to the overall outlook of things in Switzerland. And so this disputation was going to take place all day long on a certain occasion in which representatives of the Catholic tradition would be there, experts and scholars, and people representing the Reformation tradition would be there, and they would have a public dispute, a public debate, and the leaders of Lausanne and the people of Lausanne would listen. And at the end of the day, decide. So it was just, kind of an open public conversation along those lines. William Farel wanted very much to be there and influence the proceedings in any way that he could, and he very much wanted John Calvin to be in attendance as well. And so the two of them traveled together the distance to Lausanne and showed up. And as the proceedings unfolded, it became clear that those people representing the Reformation were truly outgunned. That those who had come representing the Roman Catholic view were superior in their scholarship, superior in their academic capabilities. They were more able debaters and so on. And it just felt like the whole mood was drifting pretty heavily toward the Roman Catholic choice. And William Farel, of course, was increasingly frustrated by this. And he wasn't able to say much that was actually influencing the proceeding. And so he kept elbowing John Calvin. You know how it is? Yeah, would you say something? And Calvin's just sitting there. He just wants to be quiet. Finally, Calvin, toward the end of the day, when it seemed like pretty much all was lost for the Reformation, Calvin did stand up. He was just out in the gallery, and he stood up and addressed himself to this small cluster of Catholic scholars and asked them about 3 questions. Questions that were sufficiently penetrating that it became clear this guy would not be so easily dusted off. And they gave a couple of answers that were actually sounded good, but were not adequate, and Calvin knew it. And he proceeded at that point on to talk for about an hour. He had no notes. He spoke strictly off the top of his head, quoting from memory at length church fathers, major sections of scripture, and other sources showing such a ranging command of the material that he absolutely silenced those who were on the other side, so that by the time he sat down, which was about an hour later, the whole place was in a kind of silent hush. Then there was a character by the name of John Tandy. He was one of these Catholic scholars. He was a Franciscan. He was a preacher. He was an enemy of the Protestant movement. And he stood up and he made the following short speech, quote, "Based on what I have just heard, I confess that I have sinned against the Spirit and rebelled against the truth. Because of ignorance, I have lived in error and spread wrong teaching. I ask God's pardon and the forgiveness of the people of Lausanne. I give up my role as a friar. From now on, I will follow Christ and his pure teaching alone. It's one of the most astonishing and dramatic moments in the early career of John Calvin. And at that point, it became increasingly apparent what a powerful force he was going to be for the ongoing development of this movement. He returned with William Farel to Geneva for 2 of the most miserable, horrific years of his life. Later, he said, if anything could be hell on earth, this was it. It was awful. And the reason it was awful was because these libertines hated John Calvin. They hated his principle of public decency and morality. Some of you who are familiar with Calvin, and especially with some of the caricatures of Calvin that have come down to us, mostly from his enemies, may have an impression in your mind that is something like this, that Calvin liked to wander through the streets of Geneva, sort of like Diogenes wandered through the marketplace of Athens looking for an honest man, that image of the lantern in broad daylight, and Calvin was looking through Geneva looking for sinful people and looking under every rock, and so that's kind of the picture people have of him, like this hyper-moralist who was running around trying to catch perfectly ordinary, innocent people doing bad things so that he could make their lives miserable. I tell you, nothing could be further from the facts of the matter, but it is those who wanted to kind of distort our view of him who've perpetrated that. That image comes from this moment in history when you have this open, licentious expression of a kind of highly distorted understanding of the Reformation, and Calvin trying to establish the principle that the Christian faith calls us to public decency and public morality, and that this kind of life will not do in such a community. And that was exactly what he did, and for that reason, he was made the brunt of all kinds of jokes. Every joke that was invented during those 2 years had John Calvin as the punchline for it. On multiple occasions, as he was walking down the street, he was hit by the water closet pot, that kind of thing, chamber pot. Yeah, he was. In other words, it was a horrific and miserable time. He hated every day of it. He only stayed there out of a sense of duty. 2 years later, these libertines had such influence in the city that they actually ran John Calvin and William Farel out of town. It was the happiest day of Calvin's life. He was so happy to be run out of town, and he finally was able to complete the journey he had begun 2 years earlier and go to Strasbourg, which is where he'd been wanting to go all along. And he was there for 3 years, and these were 3 of the happiest years of his life. And so it was almost as if God rewarded him with a little reprieve after this time of just terrific pain and torment there in Geneva. Several things happened while he was here in Strasbourg. He preached every Sunday at a little church, which was called the St. Nicholas Church, Strasbourg, still there to this day. Some of you may have been there. The building looks a little different than it did in Calvin's day, but he was a pastor. And he was also influenced by a much older man who gave him a lot of counsel as to pastoral skills, a man named Martin Bucer. And so they formed a fast friendship. And Calvin, sort of as a young man now, was kind of honing his professional skills as a pastor. He was a great academic. He wasn't so great at bedside manner, that kind of thing, So this was where he really got some help and really distinguished himself as a very widely beloved and appreciated pastor. He published at this time his 2nd edition of the Institutes. It was a growing work. Over the years, he republished it many times. Each time it came out a little bigger. I might mention to you on the side, I read 1 chapter out of the Institutes every day. It's just good for your soul. You should do that. I remember Dale Bruner once saying, we should read 1 page out of the Book of Confessions every day. I can't tell you I do that, but I plan to, But Calvin is wonderful reading. It just is good, it clears your head. And so anyway, this is the growing work. And he also published a commentary on Romans at that time. But maybe the most interesting thing he did at this time was he married a woman by the name of Idolette de Bure. It's interesting because he had earlier said this about marriage. He said, quote, "I who have the air of being so hostile to celibacy, I am still not married, and do not know whether I ever will be. If I take a wife, it will be because, being better freed from numerous worries, I can devote myself to the Lord." So you have a little bit of a kind of an academic attitude here, toward marriage. Not exactly like he's just has this robust desire to be married, but it's like, if it comes along, it'll be fine. That was sort of his attitude before he met Idolette de Bure. Idolette de Bure had been married to an Anabaptist pastor, and they had come as refugees to the city of Strasbourg. Now, the Anabaptists and those in the Reformed tradition didn't get along all that well, but they showed up and they were protected there. It was still a place where they could have some safety from essentially the Roman Catholic forces that were out to get them. But over time, the husband of Idolette de Bure came to embrace this instruction that was being given by Calvin, so impressed with the quality of his understanding. And then he died. The husband died in a touch of the plague that came through on one occasion, leaving Idolette de Bure a widow with her 2 sons. Calvin actually presided at the funeral services and provided pastoral ministry. And then sometime later, he actually began to court Idolette de Bure, and they wound up getting married about that time, about 1541. If you ever come across a little book entitled Idolette, you should pick it up. It's a story of Idolette and her career and her life, written by a woman whose name is Edna Gerstner. Edna Gerstner was herself the wife of John Gerstner, who was a Presbyterian theologian and church history professor at the at the seminary in Pittsburgh for many years, for 40 years. And so this was her husband, and Edna Gerstner is the one who wrote this book. The dedication in the book is worth the price of the book all by itself. And here's how it goes. She says, "I dedicate this book to my beloved husband, John Gerstner, without whose help this book would have been much more interesting, but much less accurate." So Edna Gerstner had a wonderful story to tell about Idolette, but most of it, was sort of over the top, and John had to keep kind of honing her back and bringing her back to the facts. But anyway, it's a wonderful book nevertheless, so if you ever come across it, it's worth reading. All right, well, 1541. John Calvin receives a visitor from the city of Geneva. The visitor sits down with John and says, "John Calvin, the city council would like for you to come back to Geneva." Do you remember what Calvin said to Farrell? Same answer. Calvin had absolutely no interest whatsoever in going back to that miserable place which stood for the most painful time of his life. But once again, these folks from Geneva were pleading with him. They said, "This libertine population created so much problem that we have finally been able to basically either get them out of the town or silence them. And now we are at a point where we need leadership. We need the leadership that we didn't appreciate when you were there the first time. Will you please come back?" And Calvin did not want to go back, but there was considerable pressure that was put on him, not only by the city of Geneva, but by Martin Bucer, his pastor friend, his own wife, and others believed that this was actually God's call, that God was summoning him back to this ministry in Geneva. And so with a great deal of misgivings, right down to his toenails, he nevertheless agreed. And if you want to know what happened, you'll have to come back in 3 weeks. His comment at this point was, quote, "Rather would I submit to death 100 times than to that cross on which I had to perish daily 1,000 times over." But nevertheless, he returned to Geneva, and we'll see what happened when we get back.
Okay, so I'm gonna skip a lot of stuff here.
To say than I have time to say, but let me at least hit some high points. He wrote 59 major theological works, some 4,000, I'm going to say in quotes, letters. These are not letters you scratch off to your friend, you know, in 5 minutes. These are major theological treatises. He would receive questions from political leaders, from religious leaders from all over the world, and he spent a fair amount of time giving very thoughtful response to these, and there's some 4,000, most of which are actually available today and are really very good reading. He conducted himself in ceaseless labor as a pastor. That was his fundamental role. The main thing that John Calvin was in Geneva during those years he was there was a pastor. He was a pastor, not a politician, not a policeman, not any of those things that often are the impressions we have. He was a preacher and a writer, and that was his principal occupation. And all the other things he did were sort of tangential to that primary concern. We talked about his preaching multiple times every week, but he didn't neglect also other pastoral duties like visiting those who were sick and dying. In particular, there were 2 or 3 times when the plague touched Geneva. Of course, the worst had been many centuries earlier, but the plague was still out there. They knew enough about the plague these days to quarantine people. And so as soon as anyone was infected by this, they would put them in a quarantine situation, but pastors were expected to visit them. The city council, every time this happened, met and passed a law prohibiting John Calvin from visiting people who've been touched by the plague. This is the one time we know of when Calvin disobeyed. He cheerfully and disobeyed that law, and he would take his rotation with the other pastors and visit these people and give them, of course, spiritual counsel and help and encouragement in these waning days of their lives. He was a pastor. He was so influential in the city of Geneva that it was noted by many people as they would visit the city that it was a place where prayer and psalm singing never ceased. Constantly, it was just a place where it seemed that there was open, evident worship in the entire town. And in a sense, the tone for all of that wonderful atmosphere was from this man. He established schools, hospitals, homes for the poor were built, and these became a model for many other efforts to do something like that throughout Europe. Geneva was said by John Knox on his time there to be the most Christian city on earth, and Knox himself hoped to implement something like that in his reforming efforts in Scotland. Calvin wrote commentaries on almost all of the Bible. There were 2 or 3 books that he didn't get to. He was considered almost universally the finest biblical exegete of the Reformation, and I've heard people who are not necessarily sympathetic to Calvin, who are nevertheless scholarly, recognize that he is in some ways the first modern exegete of the Scriptures. He has the instinct for the Scriptures that would embrace a kind of critical attitude while at the same time holding the Scriptures in the highest possible esteem. But you read the kind of clinical approach he'll take to a text to understand it before then the next step of applying it, and you realize you're dealing with a man who had a remarkable insight. The commentaries of Calvin on the Bible are still available. I've got his New Testament commentaries on my shelf and will frequently refer to them just for the wonderful, refreshing insight that he brings to his exegesis of Scripture. He made major theological contributions in a variety of areas. If people know not much about Calvin and they've heard of Calvinism, then what they think of is predestination. And Calvin was a predestinarian. I'm not going to apologize for that. You know, we are robust in that affirmation as Presbyterians. So there's nothing. But the point is, at that point, he's not novel. There's nothing that he's bringing to the table here that hadn't been said by folks before him, going clear back to Augustine. But Calvin did innovate in some very important areas. He did say some things that others had not said before him, and this is in a variety of areas of theology. He worked out what's called the marks of the true church. The Catholic Church, as you probably know, had insisted that it is the true church, period. And it raised the whole debate, how do you recognize a true church? And Calvin spent a fair amount of time working out, and I'm going to give this to you very briefly, the fundamental elements of the marks of a true church. There has to be the correct and proper preaching of the scriptures, the gospel. There has to be the proper administration of the sacraments. There has to be a legitimate form of biblical church government. There has to be the exercise of church discipline. And he works out each of those in some detail and saying that if you find an institution that is behaving along those parameters, then there's good reason to think this is a true visible church. He also worked out what's called the Munus triplex. We take this for granted, but really it's Calvin who gives this to us. This is the threefold offices of Christ as prophet, priest, and king. And he works out the Christology of Christ along those lines and gives a wonderful insight into the work of Christ, using it, kind of organizing it along those lines. He does a huge amount of work on the Holy Spirit. Interestingly, even though the church had been Trinitarian all the way back to Nicaea and earlier, there'd never been a huge amount of work in dealing with the person and work of the Holy Spirit. Kind of the silent member of the Trinity, we sometimes say. But Calvin devoted a huge amount of attention to this, and much of what we take for granted as part of our understanding of the Holy Spirit's work in regeneration, sanctification, Christian fellowship, and so on, much of how we understand the work of the Spirit, we can thank John Calvin for his labors there. He, of course, is very important for the work that he did in giving an understanding to the sacrament. If you were here last time or within the last few weeks, you recall the Colloquy of Marburg, in which we had Luther on one hand and Zwingli on the other, and they couldn't get together. They were too far apart. Calvin does, in a sense, come out somewhere in the middle between them with a profound understanding of the character of the sacrament and the real presence of Christ. Not the physical presence of Christ, but truly the real presence of Christ in a unique way there in the sacrament. It's more than a memorial. It is a means of grace, according to Calvin. And so when we take that bread and eat the bread and drink the wine, we are in fact ingesting, in some sense, the very presence of Christ and the very grace of Christ in so doing. I wish I had more time to explore that, but you get the feel for it. He also made significant political contributions. He was, even though not a politician, a political philosopher, and we as Americans owe him a lot for this. I'm only going to mention 2 points here. He's the first guy in Western history.
Okay, this is the main part I was building up to here, is this part on political philosophy. And yeah, so I just think that this part is extremely important. So I don't know if, so I'll definitely tell Neuro to go back to this part. It's 1 hour and 52 minutes because he's not here right now. So
to really work out in any sort of methodical and consistent way a notion of the separation of church and state. We have that expression in America. What we have in America is not what he envisioned, but it started with him. His idea was that there is the church and there is the state, and they both operate in their own sovereign provinces, and one cannot properly intrude on the business of the other. He believed the church should be close enough to the state to exercise prophetic critique, but far enough from the state to avoid encroachments by the state into the business of the church. This was brought to a head many times during Calvin's tenure in Geneva. I'm just going to give you one quick illustration of it in my time rapidly getting away from me. But there were some characters in Geneva, politicians, who did some things, not going to give you the details, not pertinent, but did some things which Calvin viewed and which generally the church viewed as beneath the dignity of what, honorable statesmen should do. And they were publicly called on it. And these guys were not very happy about that, to have a churchman now criticize their public actions and indicate that they had done something that was beyond the scope of their appropriate and legitimate authority. So these guys basically cooked up a showdown in which they came to the church with arms, that is swords, armaments, came to church demanding that John Calvin administer the sacraments to them, as if to force Calvin to sanction their behavior by extending the sacrament to them. This is the kind of thing, you see, that the separation of church and state really stood for. Calvin stood in front of the Lord's table at that point, guarding it from these people, and made the following statement, quote, "God has brought us into his family as a most excellent father concerned for his children. He gives us food to nourish us. Therefore, through his Son, he gives us the bread and wine, the life-giving body and blood of Christ. But this spiritual food is turned into deadly poison for those who partake unworthily, casting them down to greater ruin. I will not give the bread and wine to anyone whom the church has forbidden to receive it, and woe to any who tries to take it by force. You may break these arms and you may take my life, but you will never force me to deny the table of the Lord." So the guy had some courage, you know, and there he basically stood up to these folks and they left. They weren't able to pressure him into that. The last thing that I'm going to mention with respect to Calvin is this term you'll sometimes hear, some of you have heard it, that Calvin is the inventor of America. We used to hear that a lot more than we do anymore. America's changed a little bit in my lifetime, certainly, and I think you probably know what I'm referring to here. But the heart of our constitutional form of governance really does, more than I would say any other single person, probably owe its genius to the work that was done by John Calvin. I just want to give you a quote here from a Reformed theologian and historian, Lorraine Bettner, who makes this comment on this point. He says, quote, "With this background, we shall not be surprised to find that the Presbyterians took a very prominent part in the American Revolution. Our own historian, Bancroft, says, the Revolution of 1776, so far as it was affected by religion, was a Presbyterian measure. It was the natural outgrowth of the principles which the Presbyterianism of the Old World planted in her sons, the English Puritans, the Scotch Covenanters, the French Huguenots, the Dutch Calvinists, and the Presbyterians of Ulster. So intense, universal, and aggressive were the Presbyterians in their zeal for liberty that the war was spoken of in England as, quote, the Presbyterian Revolution." An ardent colonial supporter of King George III wrote home, quote, "I fix all the blame for these extraordinary proceedings upon the Presbyterians. They have been the chief and principal instruments in all these flaming measures. They always do and ever will act against government from that restless and turbulent anti-monarchical spirit which has always distinguished them everywhere." Did you know that? You're Presbyterians in here, you know that. When the news of these, quote, extraordinary proceedings reached England, Prime Minister Horace Walpole said in Parliament, quote, "Cousin America has run off with a Presbyterian parson." And that's a reference to John Witherspoon, who was born in Scotland, was a pastor in Scotland, but moved to America, became the president of Princeton, and was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So that was the guy that he had in mind. History is eloquent in declaring that American democracy was born of Christianity and that Christianity was Calvinism. The great revolutionary conflict which resulted in the formation of the American nation was carried out mainly by Calvinists, many of whom had been trained in the rigidly Presbyterian College at Princeton, and this nation is their gift to all liberty-loving people. So we Americans, I think we should at least occasionally tip our hats to John Calvin and the contribution he made. I mentioned right at the beginning of our comments the statement by the Apostle Paul, and I want to read it one more time. "As for me," Paul wrote, but I believe Calvin could have said it, "I am already being poured out as a libation, and the time of my departure is come. I have fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I have kept the faith. From now on there's reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." None of us in this room, I suppose, have the genius of John Calvin. I know I certainly am not even a thimble-sized intellect compared to his. But I think all of us can aspire to be able to say, as we are nearing the end of our brief tenure on this planet, these words. Because whether we have the gifts of Luther or Calvin or Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine or some of the other...
All right, that's pretty much the part I wanted to play here. So now let's go back to this. Well, let me look at some of this here.
The doctrine of predestination is a Calvinistic doctrine, as if Calvin himself is the only one who ever taught this doctrine, as if it sprung from his mind alone, and therefore it's the Calvinists who are to blame for all of this talk of the subject of predestination. Well, that reality of the way Calvinism is viewed as the sort of standard bearer of predestinarian language.
All right, let's go to this here, back to this thing.
Eternalism in theory of knowledge. In internalism, we believe something because of other beliefs that we hold, or because of other subjective, other things within our subjectivity. So we justify our beliefs internally. We justify our beliefs by pointing within ourselves. An externalist believes that our beliefs are justified because of their connection to reality, because they're connected to something outside themselves, because they're connected to something beyond ourselves. Plantinga is an externalist rather than an internalist. It's been traditional in philosophy to distinguish between three elements of knowledge. That knowledge includes belief, true belief, justified true belief. So to have knowledge, your belief must be true and it must be justified. Knowledge is justified true belief. Now, around 1960, there was a controversy about that definition. There was a man named Gettier who taught at Wayne State University in Michigan, and actually it's interesting because Plantinga taught there too, and Plantinga knew about Gettier, and Gettier cited some counterexamples to this definition, some cases in which we would call something knowledge, but in which it's not justified true belief, or cases where we admit that something is a justified true belief, but we would not call it knowledge. So this definition has been controversial, and I think it's been controversial because of the ambiguity of the term justified, where we use the term justify, of course, in epistemological terms. A justification is when you tell somebody what basis you have for believing something. When you try to justify your belief, to tell why you believe it, and show that your belief is not just belief, but is also knowledge. Now, I think it's very difficult to define what constitutes a justification for belief, especially if you're not a believer in God. I think ultimately God is the norm. God is the one who justifies, not only in soteriology, but also in knowledge. Our beliefs are justified insofar as they agree with God's word. But of course, secular philosophers aren't willing to admit that, and so they've tried to find other ways of justifying claims to knowledge. Plantinga is a Christian, of course, and he doesn't object to having God's word involved in there somewhere, although frankly, I don't see a whole lot of role for God's word in Plantinga's epistemology. He often sort of writes almost as if he were a secularist, although at points he indicates that he is not. But Plantinga finds fault with the term justified here and would like to substitute for it the term warranted. The distinction that he makes is that a justification is internal. I justify beliefs because I point to something within me that justifies those beliefs. A warrant is based on something external. It's the connection between my thinking and the world. So he has written many articles, of course, but three major books that set forth his Reformed epistemology position. These three books are called Warrant. And the first volume is called Warrant, the Current Discussion. The second volume is called Warrant and Proper Function, where he sets forth his epistemological position. And then the third volume is called Warrant and Christian Theism. That's not the exact name, but that's what it's about. It's about warrant and Christian theism. He says that the true warrant that justifies human knowledge is the proper functioning of our epistemic equipment. That is the capabilities of knowledge that God gives to us. And so Plantinga wants to say that we justify beliefs by showing that our epistemic abilities are in proper order, okay? That they're working properly, that they're functioning properly. Plantinga now argues that contrary to W.K. Clifford, belief in the Christian God does not need to be subject to the evidentialist demand. Evidentialism says you may not believe in anything without proper evidence. Well, Plantinga says that that's not true. He opposes that, and he says that belief in the Christian God must not be subject to that demand. We have the right to believe in God without evidence. For Christians, he says, belief in God is a foundational belief, even a properly basic belief, a belief by which we build other items of knowledge rather than seeking to build our belief in God on something that's more ultimate. So God is part of the foundation. Positively, our belief in God comes through the proper functioning of our cognitive faculties in certain situations. For example, when you're standing out at night and you're moved by the starry heavens to say someone must have made all this, you're moved to believe in God. This belief is, a lot of people would say that this is a cosmological argument, but sometimes it's not. I mean, there are a lot of people who are not capable of constructing arguments, and yet they're amazed when they look at the starry heavens above. Kant mentioned this, for example. I'm sorry, I'm teaching. So Kant, let me get back to Plantinga. I was interrupted a little bit. But belief in God then is a foundational belief, not a belief that comes out of other beliefs. And it comes through the proper functioning of our cognitive faculties in certain situations. There's something about those starry heavens that makes us exclaim, yes, there is a God. And Plantinga equates that with Calvin's sensus deitatis, the sense of deity. It's not necessarily by an argument. It may be just an overwhelming sensation, an overwhelming feeling that comes upon you. Now, this belief is a basic belief, but for Plantinga, basic beliefs are defeasible. That means they can be defeated. They can be rebutted by evidence, for example, against God's existence. Of course, the believer may also find defeaters to those defeaters. They can find defeaters to that supposed evidence. So you see how Plantinga understands belief in God. It's a belief that comes at us when our knowledge faculties, our cognitive equipment, if you will, is working rightly and is in a place, is in a position like under the starry heavens, is in a position where justified beliefs tend to come into the mind. Now, some questions about this. Why should we take belief in God as properly basic? Plantinga, as over against classical foundationalism, believes that we should not limit basic beliefs to self-evident truths and such. But what criterion is there for choosing beliefs that are properly basic? Here is the great pumpkin objection. Can't you just take anything and make it properly basic? For example, you know the great pumpkin from the Peanuts comic strip. The great pumpkin is Linus's made-up religion. Linus, every Halloween, goes to sit in the pumpkin patch, and he says that according to his theology, every Halloween, if you are sitting in the most sincere pumpkin patch, it has to be sincere. As you're sitting in the most sincere pumpkin patch, the great pumpkin will arise and bring gifts to all the little boys and girls. Well, you can imagine a 5-year-old kid inventing a religion like that. And we're asking the question, can't we make the great pumpkin properly basic? Well, says Plantinga, you can't just make anything properly basic. The relevant examples of basic and non-basic beliefs will come from those that are accepted as such in one's own community. If you are raised in a Muslim family, well, you will take Allah, you'll take the Quran as a properly basic belief. If you're raised in a Christian home, you'll take Jesus and God as part of your foundation, as part of your properly basic beliefs. But nobody is raised in a community that honors the great pumpkin, so the great pumpkin is excluded there. But then the other questions come up. Okay, so I'm justified as a Christian growing up in a Christian home. I'm justified in taking God and taking Jesus as part of my foundation, part of the foundation of my beliefs. And somebody else who's raised in a Muslim home takes his Islamic religion as part of his foundation. And in Plantinga, according to Plantinga, those are both justified. I mean, sure, you know, we have a right to do that. If you're 4 years old or 5 years old, where else are you going to go for knowledge? That's all you know. Of course, you believe that these are true because you've been raised to believe that these are true, and you really have no alternative. These are the authorities that tell you what is true, and you have no basis for questioning it. So you grow up believing. One grows up believing in Jesus, another grows up believing in Allah, and they are each justified in doing what they do. They've done everything they can. They've done everything that they can be reasonably expected to do to justify those beliefs. But still, they grow up disagreeing as to the true God. Well, so Plantinga says, what do we do about the fact that people disagree about what's basic? Well, Plantinga says, of course, members of other communities may disagree, and some will be rationally justified in taking a different basis. Some of them will take Islam as basic. Some will take atheism as basic. So there will be disagreements that are hard to overcome. But that's not a problem for Christian beliefs. Disagreements are to be expected. In Jesus' own time, there were people who disbelieved in Jesus. Paul all the time encountered people who disbelieved in Jesus, who disbelieved in the Christian faith, both Gentiles and Jews. So the Bible tells us that this is the way things are going to be. It doesn't lead us to think that everybody is going to agree with us. Now, but does this mean that all these different beliefs are true? No, certainly not. The fact that people disagree as to their basic beliefs doesn't mean that every basic belief is true. The fact that everybody is justified, see, the Christian is justified in taking the Bible as his basic belief, Muslim is justified in taking the Quran as his basic belief. These are justified beliefs, but they are not necessarily both true. There are legitimate arguments about that. Well, how then does this conclusion help the Christian? It shows that the Christian is rational in taking belief in God as properly basic. It doesn't show that the Christian's belief is true. It is defeasible, and as Plantinga indicated, we need to confront arguments from people who hold different basic beliefs, and those who oppose it have the right to take their beliefs as properly basic. So Plantinga's religious epistemology requires supplementation to show that Christian belief is not only properly basic, but that it's also warranted or true. Plantinga himself has offered arguments to this effect in his other writings. There's a book that he writes called God and Other Minds. There's another book that he published called God, Freedom, and Evil. That's the more popular form. The more technical version is The Nature of Necessity. And in these books, Plantinga develops an ontological argument, for example, based on modal logic. He also has written a paper called something like 18 or 19 pretty good arguments for the existence of God. Look that up, Google that, and you'll find it's a very interesting paper if you know something about the technical language of philosophy. So Plantinga does offer arguments. He's not saying that argument is irrelevant. He's not saying that you should believe in God by blind faith. But what point is he making then? Well, he's saying that you are rational if you believe in God without arguments. Okay, you don't have to have an argument to believe in God. W.K. Clifford is wrong. You have a perfect right. You're perfectly respectable if you believe in God without arguments. Okay, that doesn't prove that Christianity is true, and of course you need further argumentation if you get into an argument about that. So now, see, I want you to be aware of where we are in the history of thought. I think I put this data, this chart up on the board for you at one point. Anselm of Canterbury, who developed the ontological argument, makes a very strong claim for that argument. Basically, what Anselm says is that if we understand the word God, we know that God exists. So the term, the phrase God exists, the sentence God exists, is a logically necessary sentence. It cannot possibly be false, sort of like a tautology almost. Thomas Aquinas rejected Anselm's argument, and Thomas Aquinas offers us a somewhat lesser claim. Thomas Aquinas, remember, said that the existence of God is demonstrable. He asked the question, can it be demonstrated that God exists? And he answers, yes, it can be demonstrated. Then you get into people like Pascal and Joseph Butler, who don't seem to be arguing that the existence of God can be demonstrated. They seek to argue that the existence of God and the truth of Christianity are highly probable. So see, we've moved downward. We've moved from logically necessary to demonstrable to highly probable. And now here we are with Plantinga, who's making an even lesser claim, namely that Christianity is rational. In other words, you're not crazy if you're a Christian believer. Now that's fine. I think his argument is good. I think it proves what he's intending to prove, but it's not proving very much. And to prove, to get to the conclusions of traditional apologetics, Anselm, Aquinas, Butler, and Pascal, in order to get to those kinds of conclusions, you need supplementation. Furthermore, I would say that biblically speaking, it's not enough to believe in God as properly basic in Plantinga's sense. Now, when Plantinga says God is properly basic, that sounds like God is our presupposition. God is our foundation on which we build everything. But remember, that's not quite true. Plantinga believes that our belief in God can be refuted. So properly basic does not mean that our belief in God is the standard of rationality, or that our belief in God determines what we think about evidences and all. No, belief in God, according to Plantinga, can be refuted by evidence. It can be refuted by logic. So it doesn't govern logic. It doesn't govern evidence. So now I think Scripture makes a stronger claim than that. I think, according to Scripture, God is not just a properly basic belief, which we hold because we were raised in a Christian home, let's say, but that can be refuted by someone who was raised in a different kind of home. Rather, in the Bible, God is the Lord of all, and therefore the Lord of all reasoning. God is not just properly basic, God is a presupposition. And unlike Plantinga's properly basic beliefs, a presupposition is not defeasible as long as it is held. For a presupposition serves as the very criterion for truth and falsity. It serves as the very criterion of epistemic justification. And those who hold contrary presuppositions have no right to hold them, okay? Plantinga says that the Muslim, as far as properly basic beliefs is concerned, the Muslim...
See, he's trying to get out of this by saying that a presupposition is really, really different than a properly basic belief. But there's no real difference between them. I mean, you know, a presupposition is part of your argument that you can't prove that functions as a sort of justification for the rest of the argument. So how exactly is it much different? Right. So, I mean, I think Plantinga invented this game, right, of sort of presupposition.
Has just as much right to hold his as Christians have to hold theirs. But in Romans 1, Paul says that those who disbelieve in the God of the Bible have no right to hold their beliefs. They have no excuse because God is clearly revealed in the world in which he's made. So those who hold contrary presuppositions have no right to hold them. They willfully violate the clear knowledge of the true God revealed.
And this is how basically Plantinga wins this game too, because he points out the argument of evolution versus naturalism. So we may go to that next. I also want to record some of Dusty's show because I know it's going to be a bunch of goy slop there that most likely is dying to be, looked at there.
To them, and they will
crying to be, dealt with.
Will be judged for their unbelief. And this, I think, is what Calvin taught. So I don't think that Plantinga has read as deeply in Calvin as he ought to read if he's going to call.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like nobody's watching this, honestly. But yeah.
His epistemology, a reformed epistemology.
All right, so okay, let's see what this goy slop is at the powdered crusty.
Oh. It's pretty big production. It's got Sam Tripoli and
so sad how they're like trying to suck off all these like internet celebrities. Like, and look at his name. He called himself a douche in his name. It's crazy, dude. And it's like, yeah, it's this huge production, where, and they're all like salivating it.
Gavin McGinnis are involved.
Is this an in-person affair or
it's an in-person?
Gavin McGinnis, he mentioned it's like they're basically promoting this event. They're like Gavin McGinnis, and he used to be in a fucking the Proud Boys thing with Gavin McGinnis, right? So he's now promoting event that's run by Gavin McGinnis. It's like he might be working for the guy. It's crazy.
They do stream it too, but it's in person.
Yeah, well, okay, sure. But if you're sitting, there's a huge difference between sitting across someone like we are right now and sitting across even a distance of 15 feet. You can see your opponent there. And what if they're 7 foot tall and hairy? Then
Ben Thorpe is 7 foot tall.
I know. I'm saying, what do you do when you're 10 feet away and you're still looking up at this cocksucker? You hate him as much as you want. Did you stay shut the fuck up?
Yeah, right. And so
now they're promoting this guy, like saying he's 7 feet tall. That's just a straight up lie. I heard the guy was like 6'5" or some shit. I'm pretty sure he's not like 7 feet tall, or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, they're promoting the Thorpes. They're promoting this like goy slop event. All right. I'll just have to like go forward and see what else is going on here. All right, so here they are watching the Thorpe video.
I dwell on it. I have a great night, so don't you worry about it. I'll deal with the police. You guys, you should bond with your daughter.
Quick rape.
What?
It's quick.
I've never been raped before, but yeah, I guess it was pretty fast.
Yeah. Premature.
And the clothes back on, looking good.
Yeah.
I didn't take my clothes off. They just pulled my pants down.
They?
Then
There were 7 guys.
That sounds like a Milo
it was,
date.
it was,
You guys crying about my rape.
it was
That's actually
Pearl's,
kind of personal.
it was Pearl's Snow Bunny
I feel
entourage.
like, you know what? This is more invasive than the rape.
What is he talking about? Is he talking about being raped by dudes? Yeah, so, and of course he's talking with this dude who, you know, I mean, we showed it on Made by Machine Bob 8, you know, the type of performance that this dude does, you know, and people that think that's entertaining, you know, I don't know. I think they should go figure out what else they might be into. Skeletons in their closet, honestly.
Questioning me about my rape. You know what? You guys just ruined my rape.
Hashtag me neither.
Worst rape ever, thanks to you and your prying eyes. I'm never telling you about a rape ever again.
Sorry.
Okay, I will.
Very insensitive.
Oh, rape. You're getting demonetized, buddy.
I'm saying dumb shit. I will tell you about my next rape. Thank you. I'll text you.
I'll text you.
Well, I know you're probably asleep, but got raped again. And then we'll
be there for you.
Yeah.
Just joking about grape with Gavin McGinnis. Yeah, wow, like fun times. So
Fist bump. Just a fist bump.
Yeah.
Emoji.
You know, you're probably my age, right? Like 55?
Somewhere around there. I like to say.
all right, this is unwatchable. Like backstage goy slap. Watching these guys walk around having very uninteresting conversations with internet celebrities. You know, and yeah, this is what Neuro was saying. Like, these dudes could be sent in there to keep tabs on this event by people like Wilson, right? And these dummies are just like sitting there collaborating with them in some sort of online video, not even knowing why they're at this event.
I'm in my late 40s, but I'm just lying.
I think I'm in my late 40s, and then I see myself in the mirror. I'm like, what the fuck? Who is that?
All right. So let me actually skip a little bit, see what else is going on here.
Where's Mommy Anna? Anna's a bar.
Oh yeah, they're talking to Anna Kasparian at some point. So let's go see when they talk to Anna Kasparian. Look, she's talking to somebody else. They're trying to get into the convo so they can film it. So see, this is what it is. They go to these huge events to schmooze with these celebrities. And it's basically like you have to follow their like talking points and their production companies and who they're networking with. Yeah, get in with the same people so that you can, become a fake internet celebrity. All right. And, promote psyops, right, or whatever. Because life is, it's like, it's all about promoting the system, right? And the status quo and schmoozing with celebrities, right? That's what life's all about. I wonder how many other times this lady's just been talking to somebody totally different and somebody else that she doesn't even know is like filming her, like waiting to talk to her while she's having a fake conversation with somebody else that's barely interested, trying to like figure out, how they can make some money off each other.
Ask her about fem cells. I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan. I just really quickly. So nice to meet you. All right, take care.
Oh, that's sad. She disrupted their conversation and she goes, "Oh, well, I'm a huge fan of yours and I'd like to have a conversation with him." So now she's pretending that she's a huge fan of Anna Kasparian, right? Who it's basically a walking, talking queef bubble. All right. Liberal retard.
Good luck with everything. I just want to say you looked gorgeous on stage. I'm a huge fan, and that was crazy. I've never seen a debate like that before. Oh, with the pauses, the like 30-second pauses. I know. That I felt a little bit bad. Yeah, was it really the stage fright? I mean, I just didn't expect that at all. I just think that she maybe didn't expect the way I debate. I mean, she debates a very specific type of person, you know. And I just was expecting because, like, I've seen her debate people, and she hadn't even an in-person debate, so I can't really blame it on the in-person debate. I felt like yeah. But I mean, hopefully you enjoyed it. Oh yeah, very entertaining. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Look at Flow State's face. He hasn't blinked in like a minute. He's like, "Oh my god," you know. But yeah, let's see what's going on. So they're schmoozing with celebs. Flow State's losing his mind. All right. Oh, here's them talking to Rob Noer.
There it is. He doesn't give a fuck if his friend's right or not. He's going to back up Andrew no matter what. Andrew can do anything and he'll back him up. And he's about to say it's because they're friends. They're friends. Obviously, because that's the behavior that Andrew demonstrated that he wants people to engage in, right?
It's called being a business partner, buddy. Like what? Like he's defending his friend right now? Is that what you think is happening? How delusional is this fucking moron? And why do people watch this trash? Honestly, this is let's see how much time are we into this?
Shown that is his standard. However, I'm going to say, Rob, it's not a friendship if that person wants you to defend them at your own expense.
All right. He's spurging just because he saw Rob Noer on the screen at this debate event. I mean, wow, dude. All right, is there anything else here? Yeah, let's take a look at the Grid 1 glowy panel that he was doing, because he was doing like some sort of glow-ass panel. Oh, yeah, here it is. He had Zerka and Destiny on his panel. So, yeah.
If he said specifically the word.
So, here's Grid 1. We exposed him last time. I mean, this dude schmoozing with the celebrities. You know, how does he have the connections to get these, like, you know, A-list influencers onto his, you know, like, small channel or whatever, right? I mean, it's pretty interesting, right?
Peaceful. Like,
No. If you
nitpicking one word.
So on the whitehouse.gov website, they claim that hold on, let me look for it explicitly. So it says,
just to the host, I'm sorry. To the host, I can cuss here, right? Is there certain words I can't say?
There's no nothing that would get me demonetized. No slurs, no hard R's, nothing like that. Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Other than that, a retard. Fuck.
Oh, wait. I guess this is Wick's panel. So this is the panel of Wick TV. So Wick TV has Destiny and Zerka on. So this is not Grid 1's panel. But Grid 1 is on the panel with them. Right? So
all that shit. So, yeah.
Okay, cool.
So on the White House website, it's Save America Rallies, their second timestamp. It says he stresses the need to fight for the country through strength and determination, explicitly calling for peaceful protest. I just want
to. Ever his intention to tell anybody? I sat through courts through 6 months. I don't think at any point did he think people were going to storm into the Capitol and storm the building.
Is that Zerka on the bottom left? I don't know. It looks like John Zerka, but I could be wrong.
Or do anything. I think he wanted people to protest outside. And it's
oh no, wait, that's Enrique Tarrio, is it not? Oh, so wait, he's got Enrique Tarrio on his panel with Destiny. So that's even weirder, right?
Somebody that, again, was planning on being there.
I'm going to read the sentence here, okay? I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. He didn't tell them you need to be peaceful. You need to go and be peaceful. You need to go and not commit. He didn't explicitly say that ever. He just said, "I know you'll be."
Looks like you're. Who cares? Like, what is he? What is he supposed to say? Hey, don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't do this.
Can I give the exact quote? Can I give the exact quote?
One at a time. Destiny, finish your question. Then Enrique can answer it. And I know Tim wants in too. Is that your name? I'm sorry, Tim.
Yeah. The full quote is, at the ellipse, President Trump speaks to hundreds of thousands of supporters, detailing evidence of election fraud and urging the crowd to march to the Capitol to, quote, peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard, end quote. There is no urging the crowd there. He just says he'll know they'll do it. There is no urging. It's about an hour-long speech where he talks about voter fraud. He says we need to fight like hell or we're going to lose our country. He calls everybody in Congress weak. He's here to protest the results of the election. So I just think it's a little bit rich to pretend that there were explicit calls for peace in this. There wasn't. And this was like one thing he said almost at the beginning of the speech. Yeah.
Hey, every time you leave the house, like when you were a kid and you just got your driver's license, does your mom say, "Oh, don't crash"? Like it's retarded to even think that he has to say that every time that he comes out. He said, "You guys are going to peacefully and patriotically march towards."
Maybe he should say it when he's called a bunch of people to Washington, D.C. to protest the results of the election. Maybe that would be a good thing to say when he's kind of gotten everybody riled up and he's also saying you need to fight like hell or you're going to lose your country. Maybe it would be a good idea to really stress the peaceful part, especially considering what happened afterwards, right?
Like he did. He said, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. That's his speech.
Yeah, that is a line that he said, yes.
His speech.
But
you saying he just didn't say
that is a line that he said, yes.
You saying he just didn't say
that is a line that he said, yes.
That shit's crazy.
What the fuck?
Crazy how everybody's quiet and then everybody starts talking at once. All right, I just texted Enrique Tario to get him up here for an interview sometime.
Whoa! So he's got Enrique Tario's cell phone number, Flow State, and he could just text him. And yeah, so that's interesting, right?
Also, damn, I had something else. I had another also, and then I lost it. All right, we'll keep going. It'll come back to me.
The speech, as opposed to the other thing that was towards the beginning of the speech. It's an hour-long speech. Just saying there weren't all these explicit calls for peace. He didn't say you guys need to remain peaceful. Nothing like that. He just said, "I know you'll be marching over there peacefully and patriotically, make your voice heard." That's it. It's not a huge point. You don't lose the whole argument by giving this. Want to make sure we're all.
Do you think that he knew? Do you think that he knew that he was that the crowd was going to peacefully and patriotically march over there? Like, he didn't give a marching order like, "Hey, go storm the Capitol. Hey, go stop the certification election." It's a self-fulfilling prophecy is what he's saying. Like, you don't expect the crowd. I didn't expect the crowd to do that. I know a lot of people, a lot of liberals think that I went over there to go stop the certification election. I wasn't going to do that. And I didn't need the president to tell me to be peaceful and patriotically. I was already both of those things.
Well, so you did.
He wasn't even there. Keep in mind, Enrique got arrested, charged, and convicted for something he wasn't even there for. So he couldn't have been unpeaceful.
Did know that the Capitol was going to be broken into. It had already happened by the time that speech was over, right? The Proud Boys had literally organized to do this. You guys were involved in breaking through all three of the outer barriers, and then finally with Dominic to break into the actual Capitol with the riot shield. So you did know that was going to happen in advance, right? You were in the Capitol the night before, and you left because
you have. So
yeah.
I'll ask you, I asked the prosecutors and defense team, what evidence do you have that I knew that was going to happen? Because you said it as an absolute. So what evidence do you have that I thought that was going to happen? Because my messages in court, even given by the prosecution, doesn't show that. It shows that I'm like, holy shit, this is happening. I probably, actually, as a matter of fact, Destiny, you probably found out about the storming of the Capitol before I did.
I thought that you were convicted for this. Didn't you lose in front of a jury on this?
If you consider a jury that during their questioning, right, and said that
I do. So wait a moment. Yeah, I do consider that a legitimate jury. Yes, and you did.
Okay, yeah, you could consider it.
So okay, so what's
I mean, I hope one day when you face any assault charges or
That was not a jury of his peers. That would be my response. Yes, the jury found him guilty, but that was not a jury of his peers. That was a jury of his enemies.
This dude is straight defending feds on the fucking, like, on the Powder Dusty show, dude. Like, what in the world? There's actually, this goes on for a long time. Yeah, I guess I'll record, like, more of this. What is this? Damn, there's like an hour of this.
Anything or sexual assault charges that you're convicted of a jury that hates your guts, then they put me in the jury because the first thing I'm going to do is find you guilty.
Okay. I want to hear from some other people here. I want to hear from
Just to be
Tim.
clear, also real quick. So everything in the indictment, all of your messages about your plans.
What
to storm the
messages?
Capitol, the
Can
buildings
you point one message? Just show me one message, please.
Do you want me to read down the indictment to have you reject?
I mean,
everything
yes,
you said? Is
please.
that what you
Go
want?
ahead. We got all night here.
While he's getting that up,
I don't got nothing to do here, bro.
while
if you want to look at the indictment, go ahead.
Yeah, while he's getting that up, I do want to hear from some other people in the crowd. I wanna hear from Tim here.
Tell me
I wanna
about my
hear from
6-month
Dev,
trial. I'd
right?
love for
And
you
we'll
to be
get
a
into
professional.
there, right? So go ahead,
ahead.
Tim, then Dev, and then we'll get you Kung Fu Joe and Gibbs and Grit. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted clarification. The first thing I was going to do was with the speech, because that was the prelude to this. But Destiny, I think he wanted to limit it to specifically saying, for regard, for after the fact. But I mean, are we ignoring the tweets that he gave at 2:38 and 3:13?
What are you
He
doing,
specifically
Leah?
does use the words peaceful. He says, "Stay peaceful" for the first one and remain peaceful, or peaceful for the second one. So what is the contention about the word peaceful and when it was used specifically?
Yeah, so he made those tweets when there was already violence breaking out. So when he says remain peaceful, that's nonsense. And people were begging him to call people to go home. So like people like Ashley Babbitt got killed because he refused to make that call for people to go home because he was hoping that Congress would break down and give in to the desire for him to have the vote.
Congress had already been removed at that point. So that's a stupid thing to say. You know better than that.
Did they not come back that night?
Yeah, they came back later that night, but after all of the rioters have been removed, sir. I mean, that's a dumb thing to say.
That's correct. Yes, after
That's
they
a
removed
dumb
the
thing for you to
rioters, which
say.
people wanted to happen, they came back and they re-adjourned in order to finish the count. Correct. Thank you for doing the logical order of events. So Tario,
That's
when you
not the hold on, but that doesn't support what you said, Dustin.
I'm just trying to see if these messages are real. So when you posted a message that said "fuck unity, no quarter, raise the black flag," was that a message that you posted in a group chat on November 12th?
I put it on social media, yeah. And I'm 100%. I said that. I celebrated it.
Okay.
If I'm
When
guilty
you
of
said
celebrating it,
Biden
then
steals
yes.
this
And that
election,
was
the
in
Proud Boys
social
will be
media.
Political prisoners. We won't go quietly. I promise. Is that a thing that you posted?
Yeah, that was in November.
Okay.
That was in November.
You need to remember we're at war with a virus, not with each other. You need to remember the American people are at war with you. No Trump, no peace, no quarter. Right? These are your messages.
When did those tweets happen? Remind me when those tweets happened.
In November of 2020.
It was in November of 2020. Was January 6th an event? Did January 6th, the event at January 6th, did that ever get announced before November of 2020? Can you tell me the day that it got announced that was going to be a rally?
I'm just making sure that so far in the indictment you agree to these things, right?
Unless I'm fucking Nostradamus and I know that some rally is going to happen in the future, do you expect me in November to be tweeting about some shit that I didn't even know was going to happen? An event that I didn't even know was going to happen.
We know that on January, I'm pretty sure the Electoral Count Act literally calls out the date of the certification of the election. So we all knew in advance.
That's December 12th.
The certification of the.
That's a month before I tweeted that. So yeah.
December 12th is when the election certification? I thought that was January 6th.
No, it's not January 6th. As a matter of fact, you got that wrong. The certification of Congress, the counting of it happens on December 12th.
Just real quick, I do want to make sure that Tim gets a chance to get in here. He's been trying.
Sorry, Tim.
No, it's fine. Then Tim.
No, it's
and then
fine.
I wanna hear from Dev. Go ahead.
We knew when the certification was going to be, but that doesn't necessarily mean people knew that the rally was going to happen, in which case you still have to create the nexus between the rally and his supposed urging people to riot, which didn't actually happen. But I'm just trying to understand, you're dismissing the tweets that happened after 2 o'clock and after 3 o'clock because they happened after the speech, but in the speech he also says peaceful, but you're saying he didn't direct people to be peaceful, he just acknowledged it. Isn't that inferred?
He should have told people to go home because it had already gotten violent.
So you're unhappy that he didn't say specific words?
No, he should. Well, at that point, people should have gone home. He should have said, you need to leave. It wasn't peaceful. It was a riot at that point.
If he says to,
so you wanted him
to be peaceful, that
the initial contention, my understanding. I'm sorry,
you're
I
like
thought
beyond
the
splitting hairs.
I thought the
I'm
initial
not beyond splitting hairs. It's very easy. So if there's a riot happening at the Capitol and you have the ability to tell your people to go home, you should probably tell your people to go home.
You wanted him to tell people to go home in the middle of the speech when he says to be peaceful?
You were just
Because I
talking
thought
about his
the
tweets that he
contention-
made hours later at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Which one do you want to talk about?
But I thought you were complaining about the fact that he didn't direct people to be peaceful in the speech when he said, "I know you will be peaceful."
Well, yes,
I
but that's
just wanna
because
clarify.
I'm just going through the whitehouse.gov J6 site and I'm
just
going
stupid
through
thing to
the
argue about.
timeline on the claim thing, right? And the second claim for the Save America rally is President Trump delivers powerful speech. That was just the very first one I was looking at.
I don't
is
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who this guy is on the top left with the weird pink, like the weird looking dude.
President Trump delivers powerful speech. That was just the very first one I was looking at.
I don't even think it's.
I was starting with that one.
I don't even think it's worth getting in the weeds of what he said. He said peacefully and patriotically. Like we don't need a 10-minute discussion on what those words mean and how he meant it.
Well,
I mean,
he also did say, just to be clear, he said we have to fight like hell or we're going to lose our country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah,
I use the word fight like hell all the time.
Over the next 4 hours, how would you describe the events that unfolded? What did it seem was more happening? That people were fighting like hell because they thought they were going to lose their country, or that they were marching peacefully and patriotically?
I think 95% of the people, I believe 95% of the people that were there on J6, all they did was walk in. They didn't touch a fucking cop. They didn't break a.
What a fucking moron. Straight muted, just saying a bunch of shit. Play the video, retard.
Window. They didn't do any of that. If you want to talk about the 5%, look, I don't agree. I don't agree with the assaults. I've said this.
He was not a Proud Boy. He was involved in January 6th. That's his Twitter. That's what I was saying.
I said this on January 6th in the evening after seeing it. I said it on national television.
Garbage.
I said it on CNN and I said it on Univision. I can't vibe with people assaulting police officers. I think that they should have been arrested. I don't think that the problem was, I still think that they should be pardoned, not for their actions, but because of how justice.
Why do we care about any of this? I don't know what we're talking about now. This doesn't do anything.
Well, no.
I mean, you care about it because it's his opinion, right? That's what y'all were talking about, is what people think. Like Destiny with the ever bored expression.
I really don't care.
What do you care about, Destiny? Let's talk about butt plugs.
What are you talking about?
I heard that you said 95% were peaceful. So that 95% were peaceful. Okay, so then 5,000, 10,000 people were rioting then, if the president's own words are to be believed.
Is that the number of people? Do you believe
I mean, Dusty needs to really think, like, how come Grid 1 is invited to this conversation and not him? Right? Like, you know? Like, you're not on the stage for a clear reason. You know, even though he beat Grid 1 in the recent NPC the game thing, you know, it's like, if it's a popularity contest, I don't even think he'd have a hard time winning against Grid 1. Other than any of the, like, even after all the clout chasing they'll be doing. You know what I mean? So this is the sad part of it all, right? It's like these people already have connections. You'll never beat them by clout chasing. Right? Trying to clout chase, you know, rub this guy's shoulders and, you know, trying to get in with the people. You know, they already have their network set up. Right? So this is what this dude don't get.
People there.
Walked into the Capitol that day?
Yeah, there was about 100,000 people, I believe, is the number of protesters.
On the site, they say hundreds of thousands, so 5,000 to 10,000 violent rioters.
No. I'm asking you, is that the number? Are you citing the number of people that went inside the Capitol or the number of people that attended the rally?
I'm giving what they had as attended the rally on the White House.
I'm not asking what they give you. I'm asking what you know.
I know that around 1,600 people were charged. I don't know how many people went into the building altogether. I don't have the count on that, so I don't know.
So you don't know what the 5%. We could just say 5%. We don't got to go with the number because it wasn't tens of thousands of people that went in.
Well, it could have been 1.5%, but it was a small number. I mean,
well, because only a small number of people even got to the building, right? That's how it works. Like in any riot, it's probably like 1 to 5% of people that are being violent, right?
There were probably thousands of people in the building. I was one of them, and Enrique, I think this is, like you said. Well, I would say it's beside the point because if you want to address the violence, it happened in very select areas, and there was a context behind it.
Real quick, I don't know what the context was of the question. Do you know how much ICE members make? I don't know, but it says here, ZipRecruiter says that the median salary for an ICE agent nationwide is just under $63,000 a year. That's not that good. That's average cop shit. New York City, it's a little higher, about 70. Okay, what I found was 62.7.
Such as the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. It actually, one of the biggest reasons it wasn't an insurrection is that it got less violent when people got inside the building. If they were going to, become violent and overthrow the government, we would have been more violent in the building than out. But what you see is that when you review the video, it actually was at very select locations because people were incited.
No, it is. That's probably less than a lot of blue collar jobs. I mean, it basically is a blue collar job. If we call it 62 divided by half, 31. So that's about $31 an hour. That'll be top.
How detached is this chick? Right? She's like, it's better than a blue collar job. Man.
Top line. So that nets out to around what after you pay taxes and insurance and all that shit, they're probably taking home $20 an hour. That's not that much. You can get $20 an hour swinging a hammer on a job site under the table. Of course, you don't get the benefits, and the number one benefit of being a cop, of course, is that you get to steal drugs from people and resell them.
Or provocateurs. I agree with Enrique. Not everybody who was there was a good person.
So to be clear, the incitement was you trying to break through where cops were. When people were inside the building, they weren't.
That sounds like nowhere near the top benefit that a cop would have. Like an average cop would not be stealing that many drugs. All right, so it's like that just seems like a totally detached opinion. Like it's sweet to be a cop because all the drugs you get to steal, and then you make a killing selling it back. Like only a drug dealer would think that. like that's retarded.
Weren't violent because they didn't even know what they were supposed
to
do.
What do you mean by you? What do you mean by you? Are you talking to me, or are you talking to
the general you? Because he's talking about the protesters not being violent once they got inside the building because they didn't have much to be violent against.
Well, they have Tim on.
So you're agreeing with me and Tim in saying that some protesters were violent. Yeah, I agree with you. Some protesters were violent. I believe that they should. I believe that they should be arrested, and I believe that they should have gotten some time in prison. Yes, I don't believe that they should have gotten 10, 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I do want to. Before anyone else goes, hold on, just real quick. Before anyone else goes, I do want to make sure that Dev gets a chance to have to say.
I mean, I just think that if we're gonna hold the J6ers responsible for things and arrest them, then we should hold the agents who were inside of that operation responsible, and they should as well. If Enrique got sentenced to 22 years or whatever for supposedly planning this thing, but not even being there, then the people who planned it and were there, like
that is what happened. He is one of those people, you fucking moron. Like he's an informant that got caught planning the event. Like, how stupid are you? Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Like the FBI asset who was inside the KC chapter, they should be there. They should be getting even longer.
Right, because that's how the system works. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, of course they're gonna like put like lower fall guys underneath them, and then the idiots like you are gonna go and join organizations that those morons create, right? Because you're literally like join organizations created by the fall guys set up by the feds. That's how fucking dumb you are. That's how fucking gullible you are. Like, it's actually amazing.
Okay, and come in and give us what he's gotten. I do see Gibbs, Kung Fu Joe over there. We're gonna get you in here in a second. Dev, go ahead, give us what you think.
Yeah, I've just been listening. This is kind of crazy. Just because I don't know who you are, the guy with the green background, but you were talking about Trump's tweets, and I mean, while the riot was.
The guy with the green background. You know, you can always have trust a guy who's got a green screen set up behind him. Like, good Lord.
It's happening. You expect a decent, competent, good leader to try to calm people down. That's what you expect them to say. But I mean, at 2:24.
Real quick, we're going to segue real quick. The Asian markets opened, what time is it? They opened 2 hours ago at 6 my time. And look at silver's running away. Silver's running away. 2 days ago when I made that stonks stream, silver was at 76.95. And now as the market's open, at the beginning of the weekend, 76.95. Right at the end of the weekend, 83.59. That motherfucker's running up. And I also regret yesterday, I had to run some errands on the way home. Well, I went and looked at it.
It didn't rile me up.
Silver's gone up 3.99%. Gold's gone up.
Other people's perspective that's not here.
He can give his own
That's
perspective.
kind of how reality works. We kind of speak for how we think people are generally like motivated by things or what might cause people to do things. Are we incapable?
Well, he's
here
a people. He knows.
Here,
what
you know what? I'm going to tell you exactly what people thought. I'm going to tell you exactly.
How about let's not generalize to some bullshit. Just stay on the specific things.
No,
Dev
I'm going to
asked a
give you
specific
exactly
question.
what people
Dev
thought.
gave
And
a
I'm going
specific
to
tweet
give you my
when people
specific
saw
thought.
that Pence had failed. What did Pence fail?
So-
what were the what did that mean?
So
Give-
anybody
give
who
us
thinks
your-
that the only reason, excuse me, I think anybody who thinks that the only reason that people went into the Capitol is because Trump told them that the election was stolen is a retard. I think they weren't looking backwards, and it started with Hillary Clinton in September of 2016
What were people
calling
at the Capitol
Trump
for?
supporters
What were
as
people at the Capitol for?
a basket of deplorables. Then
Oh,
you
in
take us off
2016,
social
how
media.
many people
Then
invaded
you
the
go ahead
Capitol?
and you
The answer is zero.
definance
The
us.
answer is
You
zero. Yeah,
deplatform
that's
us.
none.
You shut down our businesses during
It's zero.
COVID.
Yep,
Right?
yeah.
You
It's
allow
zero.
the summer of
Who
love
shut
to
down the businesses
happen
during
unchecked.
COVID? Wasn't Trump the president
And
for that?
the
Who was the
straw
president
that
of the
broke the
Wasn't
camel's
Trump?
back.
On top of that, hold on. On top of that, look at this. So this is so I actually don't know.
Bro, nobody cares.
But my instinct is to say no, he should not, because I think that people should, aside from, I think that I'm generally pretty damn for free speech. So my instinct is to say no, but in reality, I don't actually.
Like, the dude's getting blown the fuck out on this panel, so he like stopped and started talking about something else. I don't know, dude. That's what I feel like.
It's off about it. Wasn't just
And thank you, Jason, for the donos. You know what?
So you don't believe that there are other factors leading up to that day from the time of the election, not including Trump, that would have motivated enough angry people to show up that day?
Well, I can tell you what the other factors are. It's actually really easy. There was a whole bunch of people online who were posting. There's a whole bunch of people online.
Hold on.
No. I'm going to
answer your question.
I'm going to answer you. There's a whole bunch of people online who are posting about how Mike Pence has the power to send back the electors so that Trump can steal the election. And everyone was hyping themselves up for this bullshit. That's why you guys went there. It was retarded.
No. That's not the only thing I'm talking about. Like, I have a list of things that factually happened, and whether or not you can observe them through 2020, vision, like from now, doesn't matter, because we had so little time to analyze these things. So expanded mail-in voting due to COVID-19, late night vote count pauses and updates in key states, changes to the election
so
procedures.
every single
Hold
one
on,
of these
hold on.
things
I'm not
failed
done
in
yet.
court.
I'm not done
They
yet.
had
I'm
their
not
day
done
in
yet.
court.
Thank you
You
very
lost
much.
on every
Hold on,
single one of
buddy,
these.
buddy. Buddy,
all of them.
did you not just
Every
hear
single
what
one.
I just
That's
said?
cute. He
Did you
believes
not
in the
hear what I
justice
just
You
said?
system.
have litigated all
Hold
of
on.
these. You lost.
Hold on. No. That you obviously weren't listening. If you listen, you could hear me better. What I said was, what happened by the time January 6th rolled around, we didn't have the time and like 8 hours a day for years on end. No, we didn't have years
Yeah, you
like
did.
you did.
Yep.
No, we didn't.
You did.
Okay, between January 6th and the election, the determination of the election, how much time was there?
A few months, but there was enough time that almost
A few
every
months,
single
yeah.
claim,
Guys, all
every
Destiny
single
can do
claim
Hold on,
that
I'm not
Donald
even
Trump
done
brought
yet.
up
Pivot,
in
pivot,
his speech had
pivot.
already been debunked thoroughly, and none of them,
Hold on.
absolutely zero of them,
I
are
would
public today.
You're gone.
So
You can't.
apparently there's enough
say-
time.
You can't.
Hold on, so
that's
Democrats
you
were
try
saying-
to stick in my chat.
Democrats are saying that
moderator
mail-in
removed
voting is
the
the
offending
most unreliable form
knucklehead.
of voting. Democrats said that.
I think
That's something
I think Grid thinks that he's muted on this end. He's dealing with his chat, but he's not.
that's not going to change.
Who asked?
Well, you know,
What
we
does it have
sit
to do with
here.
anything? It's not relevant.
Anyway,
So the White House.
How is
posted
it
this
not
thing.
relevant?
I want to hear from Gibbs. Gibbs, go ahead.
Yeah, so the White House posted this thing, and I really feel it's important that we kind of like analyze it in the 2026 light, actually. What did they say? It says, in truth, it was the Democrats who staged the real insurrection. By
it's pretty
certifying
easy
the
to
fraud of the
handle
election,
Destiny,
including
really.
widespread irregularities and weaponizing federal agencies, right? So
He's talking shit about Destiny. Oh wait. Okay, never mind. I'm retarded. We're actually watching his stream, so maybe he is muted on there. And I'm a dummy. My bad.
we're seeing, look at this. Now we're looking at right now
Who are
what's
you even
happening.
quoting? Wait, who is that even a quote from?
That
on
is the White
January
House
6th
page,
website.
whitehouse.gov,
It was
the
the page,
whole
yeah.
thing that we're here. Y'all literally posted and said, this is what we're debating today.
Well, okay,
I don't
what-
know. Sorry.
what
Anyway,
point?
well, I would like to get to it. Thank you. 1 second, please. Anyway, and so when we look at it in 2026 and we see all the fraud and we see places like Minnesota where we now have evidence that 197 duplicate ballots were posted. Yes, we do. We do have that. It was just by
Yeah, I mean, did this idiot just forget whose stream he's watching? You know, as he's commenting on it? I mean, good Lord. Like, this is the laziest breakdown of shit I've ever seen. You know, and the dude's not even commenting on it at all. You know, like, and he's literally like, the takeaway is that he's defending this Fed. It's just really weird.
in the Congress just a couple days ago. Maybe keep up to date. We have that. We see evidence of the fraud. We see evidence of this NGOs paying for it. This Trump administration has been saying from day one, when this went down, that they're basically having some sort of system in place to rig the election. So they're the real insurrectionists by subverting the of will of the voters, and that's what we're seeing has happened. They use the fraud
Why
system
didn't Trump?
and they
Trump
use
said
the
this coming
illegal
in
voters, the
2016.
duplicate
They had
voters.
4 years to find it. Why did Trump not find anything?
Oh yeah, because Biden's going to be investigating himself whenever he gets put out.
All right, this shit's unwatchable.
The fuck are you talking about?
No. Way down. So with Dominic
being helpful to the cops. But it's not the end of the world, but it's
Oh, great. Chuck and the gay guy are there. All right, let's just go to some other show here, honestly. Let's go to this guy, see what he's doing.
Because, you know, I do it myself, but I don't do it with everybody. Like, it's not worth doing with everybody all the time. But you find certain people, like yesterday, I was on the Tint Man show with Joe Cole and Beth, and they're all just, you know, hyping me up. Oh, Landry, we love this. You do this, and we love that you do that. So it clearly confirms, you know, that flow state is essentially operating in a realm that is designed to, you know, have the external person to go after. And when it becomes me, the amount of criticism that people give me, you know, for being that guy, like, oh my God, why are you talking about this person? Why are you talking about that person? It seems to never cross their mind when the person is like punching out. I don't know. It's just maybe it does, and I just don't see it. But it's, I mean, I'm fascinated by it. And especially the one that I would say is the most interesting is Ike, right? When Ike comes around and he's like, Landry, you're just always talking about moose and like, what the hell? Who cares? You guys all look like idiots. And I'm like, all right, dude, I get that. But I just, maybe he's saying the same thing to Flow State behind the scenes. I just don't see it. Who knows? But then we get into the problem of, oh, am I going to do the drama or am I not going to do the drama? I don't think it's just that simple. A lot of the times I'm just trying to speak. It's like a stream of consciousness, an outlet, right? It's community. I mean, people can say whatever they want about that. But I don't compete for turf like I know that other people do. I don't need, when I see a new person, a new face.
Yeah, am I going to do the drama or am I not going to do the drama? You know, it's just an interesting way of putting it there.
Over and it makes no sense, like this video. I mean, this makes no sense that I made this, but I fucking made it, and there's got to be a reason for that, right? Maybe there's not, but fuck. Welcome to Sunday Night Live with Modern Man. Enjoy. Snake?
Yeah, I'm the snake.
Oh,
I'm the
hell
snake.
no.
So I can honestly, I can apologize to you for being
Oh, shit. He doing a hit piece on this dude now, which, I mean, I could have seen this coming.
an asshole. I can do that. I can do that right away because I know I'm an asshole. You know why I'm an asshole? Because you and other people, and I'm not trying to make it combative, but you and other people have sat around in a circle and you've been next to people who have made up lies about me. They've obfuscated the truth, made shit up to the point where it was like creating problems in my own family. And you guys all thought it was funny. You guys thought it was funny to try to destroy somebody who was sitting there helping everyone behind the scenes. Somebody who actually gave everything. I was on that broadcast and many other broadcasts every single day. I gave so much more than most people. I gave real. I gave, everything about me. I told you guys things that I don't even tell my best friends, right? And you guys used it all against me.
You gotta remember these guys go to the Andrew Wilson debate school.
Yeah.
Like they pay a lot of money. No, literally, it's real. It's a thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like thousands of dollars.
They just throw the word obfuscating up on a big whiteboard.
Yes, that's it. That's a tell, right?
What's the goal here, right? What are we gaining? What are we learning? What have I learned about
Are you ad homming me?
Oh, yeah.
What are you talking about?
I mean, like, just you. Okay, so you made a claim about how somebody's interrupting, right? This guy, I mean, trying to have a conversation with him the way I'm doing with you right now, he's made that impossible because when he's opposing someone, if it's his turf, he doesn't let them get a word in. So I think that a lot of, let him get a word in, dude. Like, come on. I think it's just because the mustache. Like, I don't think he recognizes me.
That's what it is.
I don't remember talking to you.
Aviator shades with the mustache and the Marte hat.
Fine. That's okay. I don't need you to remember me, but I think you're a goofball, right? But it's okay. I enjoy.
Wait, hold on. When I asked you based on what, you didn't tell me still.
What do you mean?
I'm a goofball and I'm going to lose this debate based on.
You take yourself so seriously. Come on, man.
That's your counter because I take myself seriously.
Dude, you can't even have a conversation. You can't have a.
Right, I was about to say. That's a counter who talks like that.
Because I'm not sort of.
Wow, dude, the music is just not cutting it for me, man.
Green One said that to you. Hold on. Same exact thing. It's
the funny part.
All right, man. Let's just go back to Plantinga. This is all just. I'm going to leave this on and just go to sleep. I take it that eventually my laptop will just die and then the stream will end. I'll listen to this while I fall asleep. Blessings to all the people. Thank you guys for watching.
For a fairly long time ago. It's nice to be here again.
I don't know where Neuro is or what he's doing. Hopefully he's fine, but yeah, it is what it is. He left the stream here. And yeah, I have zero direction to go. But he wanted Plantinga, so we'll play some Plantanga. But yeah, I appreciate you guys. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.
And Christy, thanks very much for your introduction. I'm a philosopher, as Christy said, and I don't actually make any apologies for that. That's just what I happen to be, so I don't have that much choice about it, at least not now anymore. I'm a philosopher, and one thing philosophers are really interested in is method. What's your method? Philosophers argue with each other about that. What's your method? Well, my method is such and such. What's yours? Well, it's other thing, and so on. So there's this thing about method. So I should probably tell you about my method to start off with. Well, when my father was a student at Calvin College, which is also the college I went to, and I taught there for some time, there was another student there named Feike Feikema. And Feike Feikema was he was a really interesting guy, sort of a joker. He became a novelist, and he wrote a number of books like The Golden Bowl and Lord Grizzly and The Primitive and The Green Earth and various other novels. And he changed his name from Feike Feikema to Frederick Manfred because he didn't think the Eastern literary establishment would pay much attention to a guy with a name like Fikema. So he became Frederick Manfred. I don't know if that was an improvement or not, but at any rate, he changed his name. And well, one time he got a hold of a little book of mine called God, Freedom, and Evil, which has lots of numbered propositions in it. It's sort of logical. It's kind of detailed and tries to be rigorous and so on. And Fikema, who didn't have anything like much of a head for philosophy, got a hold of this book, and he read it, and he wrote me, and he said he really admired this book. He especially really admired my method, the sort of careful, logical, step-by-step, rigorous method. He said he really thought that was great. He said he liked it almost as well as his own method, which was just guessing. So, so much for method. So the title of my talk is An Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism. And I hope you all have copies of the handout that goes with it. That'll make life somewhat easier if you do. It'll be somewhat harder if you don't. So when I speak of evolution, I just mean what we learn about in high school and college courses in biology. The idea basically that all the enormous variety you find in the living world at present comes by virtue of development from simpler antecedents, where the developments work basically by virtue of some form of genetic mutation, random genetic mutation, they say, some form of genetic variation on the one hand, and then on the other hand, natural selection, which selects the sort of fit mutations and discards the rest. And as a result of this process, here we are. Here we and all the rest of the living world is. That's evolution. And then when I use the word naturalism, what I mean is really the belief that there's no such person as God or anything like God. So naturalism is stronger than atheism. Naturalism entails atheism, but atheism doesn't entail naturalism. You can be an atheist without rising to the heights of or sinking to the depths of, whatever you think is appropriate, naturalism. So for example, someone like Hegel, who thought there was this giant absolute, this great absolute that includes all of reality somehow, but didn't think there was an omnipotent, omniscient, holy, good person. Such a person would be an atheist, but would not be a naturalist. So naturalism, as I say, is stronger than atheism. Now, naturalism and evolution are usually thought of as bosom buddies or easy bedfellows or as supporting each other. Evolution is often thought of as kind of a pillar in the temple of naturalism, if naturalism does in fact have a temple. But I want to argue that they don't fit together. I want to argue that one can't sensibly be both a naturalist and accept evolution, as evolution is ordinarily thought of. I want to say they conflict with each other. They go against each other. The conjunction of the two, naturalism and evolution, I want to argue, shoots itself in the foot, or if you want a more complicated, learned-sounding way to put it, is self-referentially incoherent. All right? That's what I want to argue. And I propose to argue this. That is, I think Christians not only ought to be against naturalism. I mean, you can't very well be both a Christian and a naturalist. You can't at all. But they shouldn't just merely assert that naturalism is false. I think Christians ought to provide arguments here. We're enjoined in the New Testament to always to be ready with a reason for the hope that is within us. So I think the Christian community, Christian students and the like, ought to be willing to give arguments of this sort. And that's what I propose to do. This argument, I mean, I realize you're not all philosophy majors. I learned to my dismay that not all USC students are philosophy majors, but that's the way it is. So maybe for people that haven't had much philosophy, there might be bits of this lecture that are a little tough, but that's life. The preceding speaker this afternoon said he had this sign in his office that said, "Think." Okay, well, I endorse that. I think we should think. Right. Okay, so now the argument. That's sort of the introduction. Here's the argument. And I'll start on the first page there with the problem. So according to theism, belief in God, we human beings have been created by a holy, good, all-powerful, and all-knowing being, namely God, who has created us in his own image, made us like him, who has aims and intentions. He intends certain things, aims that certain things should happen, and can act in such a way as to accomplish those aims. That's part of what it is to be a person. So there is God on the one hand in the theistic story who has created the world, and then on the other hand there is creation, that which he has created. You might think of naturalism, this isn't exactly accurate, but it's in the general neighborhood, as the theistic world picture minus God. Not wholly accurate, but in the general neighborhood. Among famous naturalists, well-known naturalists, there would be Carl Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, with his portentous incantation, the cosmos is all there is, or ever has been, or ever will be. Also, the late Stephen Jay Gould, David Armstrong, the philosopher, the later Darwin. When I say the later Darwin, I mean the late Carl Sagan, that means he has died. When I say the later Darwin, I don't mean he's more dead. I'm just talking about the second part of, the later part of his life. Other famous naturalists would be John Dewey and Bertrand Russell. Richard Dawkins, his book, The Blind Watchmaker, which is a really interesting, well-written and book that I strongly recommend to you, despite the fact that I think it's totally wrong and misguided. There's, well, I mean, a lot of really totally wrong and misguided books are very much worth reading. This is one. Another one is a book by Daniel Dennett called Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Daniel Dennett is another such naturalist. John Lucas, a philosopher at Oxford, former philosopher at Oxford, says that naturalism is the contemporary orthodoxy of the academy. Maybe that's right, maybe not. But in any event, naturalism is strong in the academy, certainly among philosophers. Now, my argument will have to do with cognitive faculties, memory, perception, the faculties whereby one forms beliefs, the faculties whereby one knows things, memory, perception, insight, whereby you can learn mathematical truths, let's say, and logical truths, maybe reads sympathy, whereby you know about what other people are thinking and feeling, induction, whereby you can learn from experience. So these would be cognitive faculties. And in brief, here's how my argument will go. I'll argue that if naturalism and evolution, if that pair of propositions, if that conjunction, if they were both true, then it would be improbable that our cognitive faculties, memory and so on, improbable that they are in fact reliable, that they give us, for the most part, true beliefs, all right? Well, once you see that, then if you accept naturalism and evolution, you have a defeater for this proposition that your cognitive faculties are reliable, a reason to give that proposition up, a reason not to believe it. And once you have a defeater for that proposition that your cognitive faculties are reliable, then you have a defeater for any proposition that you take to be produced by your cognitive faculties. Naturally, that's all of them. I mean, where else would they come from? So you then have a defeater also for naturalism and evolution itself, for that conjunction, naturalism and evolution itself. So you might say it's self-defeating. It's self-referentially inconsistent. All right, that's the structure of the argument. And now you can go home. You've heard the argument? No, there's a little more to it. All right. So I want to fill in the details in the next bit here. Well, now, according to theism, we human beings have been created in God's image, an important part of which involves the reliability of our cognitive faculties, the ability to know things about ourselves and our world. And Thomas Aquinas, so for example, gives expression to a Christian way of thinking about this. He says there in these next two little quotations, since human beings are said to be in the image of God in virtue of their having a nature that includes an intellect, they're in the image of God because they've got an intellect. They can understand and know. Such a nature one with an intellect, is most in the image of God in virtue of being able most to imitate God. So he thinks of this ability on our parts to know as the most important part, maybe, of the image of God in human beings. And he goes on to say, only in rational creatures is there found a likeness of God, which counts as an image. Only in rational creatures, creatures with ratio, with reason, creatures who can know and understand. As far as the likeness of the divine nature is concerned, rational creatures seem somehow to attain a representation of that type in virtue of imitating God, not only in this, that he is and lives, and we too are and live, but especially in this, that he understands. He understands, and so do we. He has knowledge, and by virtue of being in his image, so do we. And most of us would think, at least if we thought about it, that at least a function of our cognitive faculties, memory and the like, a function of these faculties is to provide us with true beliefs. That's what they're for. And we'd ordinarily think that when they're functioning properly, when there's no dysfunction or malfunction, anything like that, then for the most part, that's what they do. Of course, it's true that that if, let's say, there are 5 witnesses to an auto accident, you might get 5 different stories. But there will be an underlying level of agreement. People will agree, at least roughly, on the location of the accident. It won't be that some thought it took place in China, but others thought it took place in Los Angeles. It won't be, there'll be a rough agreement on the number of cars involved. It won't be that one person thinks it was a 1-car accident, somebody fell asleep and ran off the road, but another witness thinks, no, it's one of those 95-car Los Angeles freeway crack-ups. There'll be agreement that it was, in fact, an automobile accident and not, for example, a volcanic eruption or a naval disaster of some sort. And there'll be even deeper levels of agreement than that. There will be agreement that there are such things as automobiles, that people use them to accomplish their purposes, which in the case of automobiles ordinarily involves going somewhere, that automobiles won't work well on the surface of the moon or the bottom of the ocean, that if you drop one out of a helicopter, it will ordinarily fall down rather than go up, and so on. All right. Now, so our assumption is that when our faculties function properly, then for the most part, now not always, not when they're working at the very limits of their ability, as in some of the far reaches of contemporary physics, cosmology, for example, but for the most part, they will produce truth when they're functioning properly. But isn't there a problem here for the naturalist? At any rate, for the naturalist who thinks that we in our cognitive faculties have arrived on the scene after some billions of years of evolution by way of natural selection, genetic drift, and other blind processes, working on sources of genetic variation like random genetic mutation. Isn't there a problem there initially? I mean, if that's how you think of it, wouldn't you be sort of surprised at the idea that our faculties are, in fact, reliable? Richard Dawkins, according to Peter Medawar was one of the outstanding biologists of the last generation. Richard Dawkins, according to Peter Medawar, was one of the most brilliant of the rising generation of biologists. This is some time ago. He once leaned over and remarked to A.J. Ayer, the philosopher, at one of those elegant, candlelit, bibulous Oxford College dinners. And if you haven't seen an Oxford College dinner, you haven't seen elegant, candlelit, and bibulous. He once leaned over to him and said he couldn't imagine being an atheist before 1859, which was the year Darwin's Origin of Species was published. He said, although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, no contradiction in it, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So said Dawkins. And then here's a little quotation from The Blind Watchmaker. I won't read that now, but you can take a look at that. So Dawkins thinks Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, but maybe Dawkins is dead wrong here. I mean, the way in which he was thinking, what he was thinking really was this. Prior to Darwin, there wasn't any very good answer an atheist could give to the question, Where did all these different forms of creatures come from? How did all this variety of life show up here on Earth? The Christians would say, and theists generally would say things like, well, God created them. That's how they got here. He thought it'd be good to have all this wide variety, and hence there is this wide variety of animals and plants. But that sort of answer, of course, wouldn't be open to an atheist. And evolution, Darwinism, gives the first sort of serious suggestion as to a sort of answer an atheist could give. That's why Dawkins thinks Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. But I want to argue that Dawkins is dead wrong here, that the truth lies in the opposite direction, that you can't sensibly accept both of these two things. If Darwinism is correct, if evolution is correct, if evolution and naturalism, their conjunction is correct, then the ultimate purpose of our cognitive faculties would be survival, or perhaps survival through childbearing, reproductive age, or perhaps maybe we should say their ultimate purpose would be the maximization of reproductive fitness. So if they have a purpose, that's what it is. Their purpose isn't to provide us with true beliefs, but to do this other thing, to maximize fitness. So here's a quotation from a naturalist philosopher, Patricia Churchland. She says, boiled down to essentials, a nervous system enables the organism to succeed in the 4 F's: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. That's what Churchland says, and I'm not responsible for what she says. I'm just the messenger here. That's what she says. So the principal chore, she says, of the nervous system is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. That's what they're for. That's what our cognitive faculties, our nervous system, our cognitive faculties, that's what they're for. Improvements in sensory motor control confer an evolutionary advantage. A fancier style of representing, and she would think of beliefs as examples of representations or of representing. A fancier style, a more developed style, a more complex style of representing, more sophisticated style, is advantageous so long as it is geared to the organism's way of life and enhances the organism's chances of survival. Truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the hindmost. So what she means when she says truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the hindmost, what she means is something like natural selection really doesn't care what you believe. Natural selection doesn't select for true beliefs. It doesn't care what you believe. Natural selection cares how you behave in the broad sense, in a broad sense of the term behave. It cares what you do, and it cares what your bodily structure is like and so on, but it doesn't care what you believe. It rewards adaptive behavior and punishes maladaptive behavior, but it just doesn't care one way or another about true behavior. I'm sorry, about true beliefs or about false beliefs, all right? Darwin himself, and I'm skipping a couple little bits there, Darwin himself recognized a problem here. With me, says Darwin, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, I don't think he means just men's mind as opposed to women's, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, whether these convictions are of any value or are at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind? This is from a letter Darwin wrote to one of his friends. And we could call, so I mean, here he's raising this very question. The horrid doubt always arises whether the sorts of beliefs human beings come up with, whether they are of any value or at all trustworthy, given how we ourselves have come to be, given how our belief-producing processes or faculties or mechanisms, belief-producing mechanisms, to make it sound sort of more scientific, given how those have developed, is there any reason to think they're at all trustworthy? So we can call that Darwin's doubt. And in a way, this lecture is really devoted to a kind of exposition of Darwin's doubt. If you want to, you can think of it, therefore, as a footnote to Darwin. Okay. Darwin's doubt. So that section there, next section. Well, one thing we might ask ourselves is, well, how exactly shall we understand Darwin's doubt? What more precisely is, how can we put this doubt? And one possibility would be, I think, something like this. And if I had a blackboard here, I would write on it. Something like this. The suggestion is that the conditional probability of a proposition R, namely that our cognitive faculties are reliable, given naturalism and evolution, call that N and E, that conditional probability is low. Now, conditional probability, this is